Hi, I'm Julie from Clever Poppy, and I'm going to show you step by step how to make this gorgeous beginner's embroidery pattern. It's called Christmas Charms. Now, before we get started, you can get your free copy of the digital pattern guide by just clicking the link in the description below. And once you've got it, jump back here to this video because I'll be waiting to walk you step by step through all of the skills and techniques you need to make our Christmas Charms pattern.
The first thing we're going to do, we're going to dress our hoop. Before we actually start stitching, we're going to dress our hoop, transfer the pattern, prepare our threads. I'm going to show you how to do a knot, and then we're going to thread our needle. And we're going to do all of that before we start the back stitch. Now, I want you to know that all of these skills I teach in tonight's workshop, you're going to use them in pretty much every time you make an embroidery pattern from forevermore. So we don't have to go over that in depth every time, and you're learning really awesome basic skills that are just going to put you in really good stead for whenever you work on a project. So just bear with me while we go through all of that tonight, and then you'll it'll get a lot easier after tonight. So tonight you do have to concentrate a bit more, but just go with it because it'll be worth it, and then you can relax into it a bit more basically from this session onwards. Okay. All right, so we are going to dress our hoop. Now, by that, I mean putting the fabric in the hoop. Dressing your hoop is a bit of terminology. We use it for punch needle as well. So I can give you some great tips with this. Basically, the reason we put our fabric in a hoop is so that so fabric's a lot easier to stitch on when it's a nice firm platform. And I personally like my fabric to be really tight in the hoop. I have seen some other embroidery experts say you don't want it super tight, but I actually like my fabric really tight. Other than I'm actually doing a whole lot of work at the moment on a project with embroidery onto clothing. And in that case, I'm being a little bit more conscious that I don't want to pull it super tight because I don't want to put my piece of clothing out of, I don't want to stretch it out of shape. But if you're just using a piece of fabric like me, like we have in our kits, or if you're using, I know some of you have said you're embroidering on plain fabric that you're going to then turn into something. Let's put it in a hoop so that you can get a nice firm platform to embroider upon. We're just going to use one layer of fabric. I would just suggest you use one while you're learning. Cool. Okay, so here we have the fabric. It's a little bit hard to see the fabric against the white, but that's it there. So I'm just going to put that to the side for now and grab your hoop. Now you just want to separate out the two sides of your hoop, okay? And just pop it on a flat surface in front of you. So I've just got the smaller inner hoop, and that's just sitting flat on the surface in front of me. And then I'm going to take my piece of fabric and place it over top in the middle. Okay, that's step one. Now grab the outer part of the hoop and unscrew it quite a bit, just so that, because now that the fabric is going to be in between, it will need a bit more, it'll need to be bigger to fit across. So unscrew it, and then you just want to pop it over top. So you can kind of feel it pop. And so now my fabric is in the hoop, right? And it's really loose. Like the hoop's just going to pop off, and I can just push on the fabric and touch the surface below me. So I find that I like having a hoop that I make my patterns in, because then what I don't want to happen is that I make my pattern in the hoop, and then I put it on the wall, and then I'm like, oh, I don't have a hoop to make my next pattern in. So I just always have a hoop that's free to work in. And then this pattern, you could leave it displayed in that hoop, or you can display it in the Nudge number 3 hoop, which I think is perfect. But you can also make your pattern in your Nudge number 3 hoop if that's all you've got. Okay, so as long as you have a hoop that's going to hold your fabric tight, then you can put it straight into that now. But if you bought one of my kits, we're going to start with the putting our fabric in the non-slip plastic hoop. Okay, fabric's in there and it's really loose. So what we want to do is tighten it up. So just give it a bit of a screw, not fully tight, because we still want to have enough, we still want to be able to pull the fabric through. So what I'm going to do is I've tightened it up a little bit. Then I'm just going to go around the hoop and just gently pull the fabric towards the back. And don't pull too tight or you just pop the hoop off. So actually I need to tighten it up a little bit more. So just keep going round and tightening it. Now, mine's reasonably tight in the hoop now, but I can, like, if I press my hand on it, I can quite easily touch the tabletop underneath. So I'm actually going to tighten it a bit more. Now, the reason I'm getting you to tighten your fabric quite a bit is because it's just easier to stitch on, and I think it just looks better. But it's not like the end of the world if your fabric's not super tight in the hoop for embroidery. It's actually really important for punch needle, but because you're actually using a tool to punch into your fabric, so you want it to be really tight. But with embroidery, it's not going to be the end of the world, but it's just much more enjoyable stitching along something that is a nice firm platform. So I'm just going to go around and tighten it a bit more. Okay. Now, yeah, so now if I push on it, it actually feels... I have to push it really hard to touch the surface of the table below. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. And you can always keep tightening your fabric. In fact, I would really encourage you as you're creating your project just to make sure you keep just keeping an eye on it. Like whenever you pick up your hoop to start on it again, just give it a little tighten because it does loosen up as you're stitching along. Cool. Okay, so that is basically how you dress your hoop. Now, if you have a hoop, this one has a really good closure on it. So I just kind of hold my finger against that screw and then turn it, and that will mean it closes up nicely. If your hoop has you can use a screwdriver on it, then I would go ahead, like once you think you've got your fabric tight enough, I'd actually use my screwdriver just to tighten it up really nicely. Don't worry if your fabric's not even for now, because what we're going to do now, so I'm assuming everyone's got your fabric in the hoop, we're just going to trim around the edge. So the reason I want to do that is because when you're stitching along, if you've got heaps of fabric overlap, you can sometimes stitch it into your design at the back, which is just super annoying. So what I recommend you do is we go around and just trim the fabric to about, let me get my ruler. Just trim the fabric so it's like 3 centimeters hanging out from the edge. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you're actually going to end up putting this into a smaller hoop anyway. For those of you who are stitching onto things like a tea towel or a Christmas stocking, you are just, obviously you're not going to trim yours, and you'll just have to be careful you're not by mistake catching all the excess fabric underneath. So yeah, just grab your scissors and go around. Don't worry, this is all going to be hidden at the end. So just go around and trim off a good part of that excess fabric. If you have like sewing scissors or craft scissors, you can use them now. I'll show you what I actually use, which I don't expect you all to have. I use pinking shears. Oh, they're such a dream to cut with. These were actually my grandma's. And the reason I do this is because when it is a zigzag, the sewers in our group will know this, it helps prevent fraying. So this is just like an extra bonus, but I do not expect you guys to have this. So you can just go around with your normal scissors. Yeah. Okay, so cool. So that is a dressed hoop. I'm just going to give mine one more little tighten. Okay, and that is a dressed hoop. And I know that seems really easy when we did it, but I bet you, and I did this totally myself when I started embroidery, I didn't actually have my fabric that tight in the hoop. No one told me. And when I look back at some of my pictures, I'm like, Julie, what were you thinking? That looks like it wasn't that enjoyable. I mean, I was having fun, but it doesn't look that great either. So yeah, now you know. All right, so let's talk about transferring the pattern. I know a lot of you have already done this, and Juliet shared a really awesome, wonderfully helpful post in our group about how to transfer your pattern using a window. So I know a lot of you have done this. So for those of you who haven't transferred your pattern on, here I am showing you. So there are, first of all, let's just cut the pattern out. So I just cut it out basically you just want to cut out your pattern so that fits in so that you can fit the fabric into the hoop that you're making it in. So generally in all of our kits, the hoop that you display your pattern in is always bigger than the template design, because I know I want you to be able to cut it out and fit it in. So I'm just cutting around it so that I can still see that line. It doesn't matter, we're not actually drawing that line on anyway. But while I tell you about transferring your pattern, you guys go ahead and cut out the template. So in terms of transferring your pattern, there are various methods. I'm actually not going to go into them in detail because I really want to keep things ticking along in the workshop tonight. But basically, the way that I do it all the time and the way I'm going to show you is that I dress my hoop and then I put the pattern in behind and then I trace it on. So you look, if it's daytime, I will attach my pattern to the back and then I'll hold it up against the window and the light will be shining through from behind and I'll be able to really clearly see the pattern on to trace it. So that's wonderful. Obviously, normally when I'm doing embroidery, it's in the evenings, so that's not an option. So like the fabric I'm using, you can see you can actually see it fine to trace through, but I will show you what I do. I use my phone. Let me quickly talk about, I want to tell you about the pens and what some tips on transferring your pattern. So don't start tracing it yet until I get to there. So the first thing you want to do is get your cutout template and you just want to attach it to the back of your fabric. Now, if I'm doing this, I actually normally just get some clear tape and tape it on at least kind of 2 spots to hold it still. Or I use like sewing pins, the ones that have the little bobble on the end, but we don't, I just thought some of you might only have your needle tonight. So let's just do it with those. So I'm actually just opening up my pack of needles. I'm just going to grab a couple of the littler ones because I'm going to recommend you use the bigger needles for actually stitching with. So just grab a couple of your little needles. Even if you've only got the one embroidery needle, you can just use that to attach it. It doesn't actually matter if it's straight because you can always adjust that later, but I like making my patterns so that it looks like they're straight in the hoop. So there's my top. That's about right. I'm just going to pin that to the fabric. Don't stab yourself with these needles. So just however you can attach the fabric to the template to your fabric. Now, some of you may not have a printed or traced copy of your pattern. So I've covered this quite a lot in the group, but you can actually trace it directly off your computer screen. Did it just the other day. So I would recommend you open it up on your screen or your tablet at actual size and then hold your paper against it and trace it. And if it's moving around, you can hold your paper, you can tape your paper and you can put on something like guided access on an iPad that stops it from moving as you touch it. Yeah, so it's very similar principle. You could actually do your fabric straight on. Like lots of people dress their hoops and then they put that face down on their tablet or screen and trace that way. And that just means when you've done it, you've traced the pattern on the inside of your hoop. You can just stitch it like that, or you could take your fabric out and flip it over. Okay, so there's lots of tips if you're doing that, but I'll just go over this way. So I'm going to turn on the light on my phone. If I can remember how. There it is. My kids know how to do that. Okay, so here's what I do. I just put my phone underneath. And if you've got thicker fabric, what I do is I just hold it really close and I use my fingers to like push. So let's say I'm going to transfer this part of the pattern. I push the template right up hard against the fabric on that bit and trace it on. Yeah, so you can go ahead and do that. But let me give you a tip. Don't do a really thick line with whatever pen you're using, okay? So if you're using a pen that you can remove, like the Pilot Friction one that comes off with a hairdryer or one of the water-soluble pens, just do a really nice faint line just so that you can see to stitch it over, and then it's just easier to get rid of it. If you do really thick lines with these Pilot pens, it leaves like a very faint line even when you remove it with heat, which isn't a major, but you just don't need to do a really thick line. Now, for those of you who are transferring their pattern on using a pen that doesn't remove later, so if you've got a transfer pen, just go ahead and start. If you're using a pen or a pencil that you can't remove later, that's totally fine. I used to do that all the time when I was learning. But just be conscious that everything you stitch over won't, unless you stitch over it and cover it up with stitches, it's going to be visible at the end, right? So what I'll just show you with the pattern is that'll be totally cool. You'll cover most things except when you're using the lazy daisy. So this is the lazy daisy here. Any of these loopy stitches, like the holly or all the bauble strings, are what we call lazy daisies. So I actually, if you have a pen that's not going to come off later, I wouldn't draw those on. I'd just do a dot at each end, and then you'll know where to put your lazy daisy later, and then you won't be left with unsightly marks. Not that it's a major. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and transfer my pattern now. So yeah, I just do a nice thin line. I don't worry about tracing on the circle. So sometimes when you're tracing an embroidery pattern, if it's really intricate, it can take a little while. But we in all of our projects, I encourage people to transfer the designs on themselves. I know you can get embroidery kits like where it's printed onto the fabric, but I think it's a really good part of the process to be transferring it yourself. And I also, a lot of our patterns use the lazy daisy stitch, and I like the idea that you don't have to cover up everything with stitches if it's pre-printed onto the fabric, because then it won't come off. But I can imagine if it's a super complex pattern, that would actually be really helpful. Cool. So just draw it on. Don't worry if it's not perfect. My baubles often don't look quite round, but that's all good. Once you've transferred your pattern on, can you please comment to say that you have? Okay. Oh, wow. You guys are speedy. Okay. I am done too. If you're still transferring your pen, that is all good. You have time to catch up. Just turn that off. All right. So just check I'm covering everything on my notes. Okay. So let me talk to you. I'm going to move on to talking to you about the next part. And those of you who are still tracing, just keep going. So you can take your template off now and put it aside. You might want to make it again another day. So don't screw it up. Just put it aside for another day. Okay, so let's talk about the next thing we're going to do is get our threads ready. Now you might think, oh, that's easy. I'm just going to whip some thread off and stitch with it. But there is more to it, okay? So let's choose the right color. So if you are making the winter version, we are going to use that beautiful, like really light tan color. It is number 437. Okay. So grab out number 437. I've got one I prepared earlier. If you are doing the summer, then grab out the lovely gold color. Let me just check. So yeah, 437 for winter, and I think it's 729. Yep, 729 for summer. So grab out your skein. I'm going to make it in the winter version. Okay, let me just tell you very quickly about embroidery floss. Okay, so these are DMC threads. DMC is just a really world-renowned cotton embroidery floss, and it is wonderful. You can just get so many different colors, like every color you could dream of. And it's just what I recommend you can use. And I know it's accessible from all around the world. Now, but there's something important to know about DMC threads. And it's that it looks like one thread, but it's actually made of 6 little strands. So it's called floss. This type of embroidery thread is called floss. I've done so much research on this to make sure I'm telling you the right thing. And let me just show you. So it looks like one thread, but it's actually 6 strands all wound up together. And look, so that's I've just split it in half into 2 lots of 3. And then I could split each of those lots of 3 out into a single floss, a single strand. They all make up the floss. Okay. Now, when you're doing embroidery, you'll see patterns that say, do this part using 6 strands. So that would mean stitch this part of your pattern using the full thickness of floss, right? Some patterns say use 3 strands, and that means actually we only want to use half the thickness of the floss, and that means using 3 strands. So most of my patterns, we tend to use 3 or 6 because I just find it easy to either divide it in half or use the whole lot. I think traditional embroidery is much more about using 1 strand of floss or 2. Like you can imagine beautifully intricate traditional embroidery tapestries and things, but so the kicker is it takes a lot longer to embroider with 1 strand of floss. It's much more fine and detailed. So, you know, being modern embroidery, I tend to use more strands for my patterns. I'll show you. So this pattern here is called Daisy Blooms, and that is all using 6 strands of floss to make these beautiful daisies in satin stitch. It's just still such an amazing result, but it probably would take twice as long to fill it in if you were like using 2 strands of floss. So it's really a matter of preference. This pattern here, I actually decided this part was so intricate that I did do 2 strands of floss for that. So it all depends on your preference. There's no right or wrong. And in this pattern, we'll be using 3 strands tonight, okay? And then we'll use 6 at other times, but I really want you to use whatever you want. Like if you think, oh, that's so hard trying to stitch with 6 strands, I can't even get it through my needle, no worries, just use 2. It really doesn't matter. It just means you cover ground quicker when you're using 6, and it's more intricate and slightly slower using less, but sometimes it's easier to use less. Okay, now we've talked about threads, and you'll understand what I mean when I say using less. Now, the other thing I just want to quickly tell you is that with the floss, it's all wound up. I'll show you the trick to getting yours off the skein, but just let me show you this first. If you were using a pattern that uses 6 strands of floss, you could just use it like this, but it's actually all wound up, and that means that it's quite a lot more likely to tangle as you're stitching along. So no matter how many strands of floss we're going to use, I generally always, apart from when we're doing French knots, I generally say it's really good practice to separate them out, and I'll show you how. I'm just showing you quickly now. To separate out the strands, and I would do that with every single strand until I've got all 6 separated, and then group them back together, smooth them out, group them back together, and then thread your needle. And it will just mean your threads are way less likely to tangle. It's a bit of a pain. You're like, oh, I don't want to take that step to unwind all my threads. Why are you making me do this, Julie? And you don't have to. But I know from experience, you're probably going to end up with more tangles later, and that will actually take you longer to fix, and it's so frustrating. Okay, so DMC threads made up of 6 strands, and we unwind them before we use them. Okay. All right, I'll talk to you about needles in a second. Let's just get our thread off the skein, and then I'll help you choose what needle. So let's just cut off our first piece. Now, if you're using DMC thread, I've already got some off this one. There's basically 2 tails that are coming out. Here is a tip that I wish I'd known like a year before I did, is pull the tail that is at the end with the number, okay? Don't pull the tail at the end with the little sleeve that's got the logo, because it all snags up. So if you pull the threads from the end that has the number, it just comes off beautifully. So cut a piece about 30 centimeters long. It doesn't have to be exact. I'm just going to measure mine so I am doing what I tell you to do. But yeah, just cut a piece off that's about 30 centimeters long. I just recommend that for beginners. You can cut a way longer piece, and it's really tempting to do that. But then it is actually way more likely to tangle as well, and it gets all twisted up as you're stitching along. So while you're learning, just go with shorter pieces. Sarah, that could be why your threads are knotting. It can also be other things too, though. Let me just show you what happens if you pull your thread from the wrong end of the, I always get this word wrong, skein. So this is me pulling it from the logo end, which is not the way to go. Oh, look, what's happened. It's all, yeah, don't do that. I've done it many times. And you can kind of recover it, but it's such a pain. Okay, so get your piece. Don't worry, we are going to start stitching soon, I promise. There's just a couple more things to cover. Cool. Yep, so we're going to stitch with 3 strands. So just separate it out in half. So you just have to go quite slow when you separate them because it kind of unwinds as you go. So I've separated that into 2 bits, and I'm just going to put one to the side. Now, you just want to unwind these threads, separate them out, and join them back together. But before we do that, let's just tie a knot in one end because I find it easier to unwind my threads once I've tied the knot. So, okay. So, let's just make a little knot. So all I want you to do is do a little overhand knot at the end of your piece of thread. Just do a couple, and that's just going to secure our thread on the underside when we start stitching. If you're wondering how to do an overhand knot, let me quickly show you. So choose one end of your thread and just curl the end around and cross it over itself. This is totally the kind of knot you guys all know how to do, but I'm just going over it in case anyone needs help. Don't be put off if you think I'm explaining something really complex. And we're splitting it into 3 strands, so just in half. So you just curl around the end, cross it over itself, and then pull the tail through the loop and pull it tight. Simple as that. And I'm just going to do a couple of those knots on top of each other just to make a slightly bigger knot. So make a knot at the end of your thread, and then this is the way I unwind my threads. Rather than separating them all out when they're not joined together, we are using 3 strands. I knot one end. It doesn't matter if you want to use 6 though, that's totally fine. Knot one end, and then I just separate them at the top. See how you can see there's 3 strands. Can you see that? Can I come closer? Yep, see the 3 strands there. I just separate them at the top, and then I just run my fingers down just really slowly so it doesn't knot. And then I know, oh, yep, those 3 are separated. And then I just smooth them back together. And now I'm ready to start stitching. So cool. So all you're doing is getting your 30 centimeter piece, splitting it in half, tying a knot on the end. I'll just do it on this piece as well. So this is the other 3. Just going to tie a knot on the end, double overhand knot because we're using knots, and then just separate out those strands. So I just separate them up at the end near where the knot is, and then I just run my fingers down, keeping them separate slowly so they don't knot, and then I just smooth them back together, and I'm ready to go. Okay, let me show you the next part. We're going to thread our needle, and then we're going to start stitching. So actually, once we start stitching, it's going to go really fast. Cool. Okay. Okay, so grab a needle. In terms of needle sizes, so I prefer larger needles, basically. So this multi-pack has size 3 to 9. Now, I just go for whatever. I'm going to go for the second largest size in the pack because we're doing 3 strands of floss. When we use 6 strands, I'll go for the big one. But you can really use any needle you want here, but I would go larger. You can go for the fully large one too. It won't matter. The risk is that you make a slight hole in your fabric as you go, but it doesn't matter because what kind of embroidery we're doing. So I'm just going to go with the second biggest needle, and then you just want to thread it. So the way I thread my needle is I knot one end, and then I thread the needle at the other end of my piece of thread. What I do, I have a few different steps. I lick the end, and that brings it all together. And then I just normally give it a little snip so that the end is really nice and crisp. And then I pinch it right up near the end so that there's just a little bit of thread poking out. Can you see that? I'll just lick it again to make sure it's all grouped together. And then I just, can you see? Yeah, then I just poke it through. Oh my gosh, it worked. Make sure you've got good lighting, guys. If you're struggling, chances are it will be the lighting. Also, it might be the size of your needle. You might need a bigger needle head. Either needle might need to be bigger. And if you're really struggling, just use less strands of floss. Like you could stitch this with one strand if you needed to. But can you tell me when your needle is threaded, you've got a knot at the end, and then we can start stitching. The fun part. So you can see all the stuff I'm teaching you is what you're just going to use this over and over again every time you make a pattern, and we don't need to go over it each time. But I hope I've given you heaps of awesome tips that make this seem way less daunting. Okay, everyone's saying you're threaded. If you're not, you can totally just watch what I do. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to tell you one quick tip, which Nicole said she folds her floss over the pointy end of the needle and then threads it through. I've heard so many people say they do it that way, but I've never had any luck. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. Cool. Okay. What I want to do is I just want you to watch me do this very quickly on my test piece, and then you can start on yours right now if you want, but I just know some of you being total beginners will want to see it. So I'm just going to give you a quick demo, and I'll knot it off at the back, and then I will start on my piece. So if you're a beginner, just watch me do this. If you know what you're doing, you can get started. Okay, so I'm going to put my needle through the back, and I'm going to bring it up at the start of the top garland string, okay? I'm going to and I'm going to just gently pull the thread all the way through so that the knot is just securing it there on the underside. Like I can't pull my thread all the way through because that knot is holding it in place. Katrina, you're going to have so much leftover thread. Don't worry. Okay, so you pulled your needle through, your knot's holding it, you pulled all the slack through, and now you're just going to poke your needle one stitch length ahead down. I'm going to hold it a bit closer and pull your needle through and pull all the slack through. And you don't have to pull really tight, just gently pull it through and have a look at the back and just make sure sometimes when you do that first step, your knot goes like that. Just make sure it is pulled the whole way through. And when I say a stitch length, it's about 3 millimeters. Don't worry about measuring it. But yeah, one stitch length is around about 3 millimeters for this pattern. There is no rule about it. It's just really great to keep it consistent along your line of back stitch, okay? So you could do your stitches longer if you wanted. I generally do them about 3 mils. 4's fine. Okay, so we've actually done one stitch already, and our needle is hanging out at the bottom. So we're going to bring our needle up a stitch length ahead so that there's a gap. So bring your needle up and gently pull through the slack. And what you've actually done by this point is one stitch on the top and one stitch underneath. You could keep doing that and it would be running stitch, which has a gap, regular gaps as you go. But we're doing back stitch. So we're going to come backwards and we're actually going to poke our needle back down at the end of that first stitch. And when we pull the needle down and pull all the slack through, we've actually covered that gap with a stitch now. And we're creating a really nice smooth line. Okay, so let me show you a bit more back stitch. So once again, we're going to come up a stitch length ahead. So there's a gap. And then we'll pull all the slack through. And then we're going to come backwards and cover that gap with the next stitch. And you can actually put your needle down through the hole that you went down in previously. That's all good. So yeah, that is all we do. We just keep bringing our needle up one stitch length ahead, pulling the slack gently, and then poking the needle back down into that hole you previously went down in. And you're making little back stitches. And it makes a really lovely regular line. So if you just try and keep your stitch length really consistent, doesn't matter if they're not though, but that's what makes this stitch look really great, is keeping it really consistent with how long your stitches are. And that's something that comes with practice. Now I'm going to start on the pattern, but Katrina, don't worry, I'm going to show you again. But let me just show those of you who have already got started how you knot off your thread once you've finished your piece of thread. So I just want to show you guys that because I know some of you are going to get to this before others. So let's say my threads run out. I've got I don't have much left. I've got about 8 centimeters of tail left, and it's going to get a bit awkward. So to knot it off, you just duck it under a nearby stitch. So I'm not going through the fabric here. I'm just literally ducking my stitch, like weaving my needle under a nearby stitch. And before I pull the slack through, see how it's made a little loop? You see that? I'm just going to dart my needle back through that loop and just gently pull it, and that's made a knot. And then I will just thread I'm just going to thread that tail under some stitches just to tidy it off, and then I'm going to snip it. So, okay, I'm going to show you guys that again on the actual pattern, and I'll try and show it a bit closer up. Can we put it on a bigger screen? We can't. I'll get it as close up as I can. Okay, so I'm just going to knot my thread again. Okay, so let's start. For those of you who want to go from the start of this, yep. I will repeat how to knot it off as well. Okay, so bring your thread up at the far left side of that top garland string. So bring your needle up and pull it right through so that the knot is sitting flush at the back. Okay, so the knot there that's what's holding our thread in place for now. Okay, so you've pulled all the slack through and you've got the needles on the top side now, and then just poke your needle back down a stitch length ahead around about 3 millimeters and pull through all the slack. So I'm going to try and show that even closer. Okay, so we've done one stitch there, and if you flip it over, you just see the knot, and my needle's now on the bottom. So I'm going to flip it back up the right way, and I'm going to bring my needle up a stitch length ahead. An angle. So I'm bringing it up a stitch length ahead, and I'm pulling through all the slack again. Don't pull super hard, just gently pull it through so that you've pulled all the slack through. And if you actually look now, you've got a stitch on the top, and then if you flip it over, there's one stitch underneath. Okay, and then instead of heading forward, we're actually going to go backwards and cover that gap with a stitch. So instead of doing a stitch forward, do a stitch back, and you can poke your needle basically back down where it originally went down the last time, and pull the slack down to the bottom, and then you'll see you've got 2 stitches in a row. And your needle and thread will be hanging out on the bottom. So you just keep doing that. So bring underneath. I just do it by feel. You kind of have to poke your needle around a few times to find the line, and that's all good. So bring your needle up again. Pull all the slack through, and then bring it back the way you came from to cover that gap. And that is how we do backstitch. Yeah. So whenever I teach you guys these techniques, I'll always go over it a few times. But there'll be some of you who are up to that point and it'll click and you can keep going. And then I know that there will be some of you who need to see it again. And don't worry, I'll always show it again. So what I want to know now is there anyone who would like me to show it from scratch again? Because I can totally do that. I will show you how to knot it off once I've got to the end of my piece of thread. And I'll show you where I kind of stop and get a new piece of thread started. So I am stabbing. The way that I'm doing backstitch right now is the stabbing method. And I'll show you how to sew it as well. Cool, Lauren. All right, no worries. I'll show you again, but I'm just going to knot this piece off first. Okay, so I'm getting to the point where I feel like I should probably knot off this piece because you don't want to go so, like my thread now is about, I just do it by feel normally, but let's see. Yeah, there's about 8 centimeters of thread left, and I would just recommend at that point, knot it off and get a new piece because otherwise you'll end up with a tiny, really tricky piece to finish with. So here is how I knot it off, okay? So you basically just want to knot it off however you can against your what you've stitched. But this is a really nice tidy way to do it that I think works well. So I just duck my needle under the nearby stitch, and which is easy with back stitch because there is a nearby stitch. So I just duck it under, often just duck it under and pull the slack through. Okay, and then I'll do that again, but this time when I duck it under, I'm going to leave a loop, and then I'm going to poke my needle through that loop, and you've got to hold your tail here so you don't lose it, and then just gently pull it tight, and that's made a nice little knot. Now you could just chop off your tail off, leave like a centimeter. Don't chop it right off beside the knot because it could unravel. But what I like to do now is I'm just going to weave it under a few more stitches back the way I came, just so we're nice and tidy. And then I can snip it off now really close because I know that there's heaps of tail there. And now that tail is actually just tidied away really nicely on the line. It's knotted and I haven't disturbed the front. So it's taken me a while to get to that point, but hey, now I can show you. I'll show those of you who want to see it from scratch again. But in the meantime, guys, you basically just backstitch the top garland string and then you backstitch that one. And that will be all we're doing tonight. And I'm going to leave you to do the second one yourself anyway, because we're at an hour. Where did that go? I will sign off soon, but I want to get you all going and knotting it off. The other thing is, as soon as I sign off this live, you'll be able to jump back in and watch the replays. So now that I'm starting with a new piece, you can pull your needle up, bring it up at the end of the line you just did. And then, okay, so those of you who just want to see it from the start again, please watch. And yeah, for anyone who is under control, you can head off and yeah, just stitch the top line and the bottom line of the garland string. Bye. Okay, so you've brought your thread up from the back and there is your knot on the underside and your knot's holding your thread in place. So then all you do is poke your needle down a stitch length ahead and pull your needle down to the back, and that's a stitch done. Pull all your slack through, and then so you've done your first stitch. Your needle's now hanging out on the underside of your fabric. So bring it up along the line. You kind of have to feel around sometimes to where you bring your needle up. Bring it up a stitch length ahead and pull all the slack through gently. And then instead of going forwards, just come back and cover that gap with your poke your needle down where you last went down. And you'll see as you pull your slack through, you've created your second stitch on the top. And then you just keep doing that. So you just keep pulling the needle up from the back on the line, a stitch length ahead, and then poking it down to cover that gap and make your stitch on the top. So you're doing back stitches every time you do a stitch. I think you really get a feel for pulling your needle up on the line as you get better at it. And maybe that's why some of you do a zigzag. Cool. Yay. Awesome. More fun than scrolling through a phone. Yay. I'm just going to really quickly show you how to sew your stitches instead of stab. It will take me 2 minutes. I have been showing you how to stab your stitches, which means that the thread goes all the way through. You pull the slack through on each side of your stitch. So I just want to quickly show those of you who are interested how to sew them. So you bring your needle up to the top and then you basically do a whole stitch in one motion. So we would normally be coming down and putting our needle down and going all the way through and pulling the slack, but we're actually going to poke our needle through and it's going to go kind of parallel to the fabric underneath. And we're actually going to bring it up that stitch length ahead and pull the slack through. And look, you just made a whole stitch in one motion. So with sewing, most stitches you can sew as well as stab. I stab normally because I find it easier. And I've already done that stitch way too long because it's a bit harder to be precise with sewing. But yeah, you can come and look. I won't go over this much more, but you can come and watch this on replay if you're really interested. Sewing is just a little bit faster. And I think once you're an embroidery guru, you'll find it quite easy to do. There was one other tip I just want to show you. Sometimes your thread gets a little bit twisted. You can just go like that to let your needle kind of hang and that will just unwind it. Welcome to the second
live session of our Christmas charms workshop. This is what we will be doing today. I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm not sure that we'll get through it all in the session, but I will leave you with all the tools and skills you need. So we are going to do this. I'll teach you how to do the sprigs. So we'll do a back stitch stem of the sprig, and then we're going to do the little side bits of foliage with straight stitch. So that's the new stitch I'll teach you tonight, and it is like the simplest stitch of them all, which is cool. And then we're going to do some more back stitch, and I'm going to show you how to stitch what I've called the geometric baubles. Now those are, with the sprigs, we're using 3 strands, just like we did last night. A little bit easier to thread your needle. But with these geometric baubles, I really wanted them to be a little bit chunkier, and I wanted to think of a stitch when I designed this pattern. I was like, what can I do on these baubles that has a bit of presence and looks like an obvious kind of shape, but isn't going to take you forever to do? And I thought, let's do back stitch with 6 strands. So we're going to, hopefully, if you have a bigger needle, see how you go, and we'll just do some stitching with 6 strands, and then you can compare how you like it compared to 3. All right, so the first thing to do is actually, I'll put that hoop to the side because that was just me making sure I like to do what we're stitching in the evening that morning, just so it's all really fresh in my head. But grab your piece will probably look like this. So the first thing to do, and this is what I always do before I start stitching again, is go around and retighten my fabric. So just go around and do that. Mine actually feels fine, but you might find if you've been working on a pattern that you've stitched a lot on that you need to. So if you are doing the winter version of the pattern, the sprigs have the 780 is the stem, and then the darker green, it is 937 for the foliage. So grab out the 780 and the 937, and you can get out, you can take off a piece of the dark brown, the standard 30 centimeter size, and split it into 3 strands. I'll show you how I do it, but you knot it at the end and then unravel them and group them back together. If you are working on the summer version of the pattern, then in this case, the sprigs have that lovely, it's actually the same color as we did for the garland string. So that was 729. And then the sprigs actually have this beautiful, how would I describe this color? Like turquoisey, light turquoisey color, 503. So grab out those colors and then get the piece that the colors for the stem, so that's the browner color, and take off a piece about 30 centimeters. I'm actually using some thread that I've had in my stash. So look, there's a nice knot in it. It's really helpful. Okay. So I'll just go through how I prepare my thread again. So we've got your piece of thread. I'm going to separate it in half because we're only using 3 strands. Like I said last night, you're welcome to use as many strands as you like, but I'm going to use 3. So I'm just going to gently pull those apart. If you pull really fast, because it's slowly unraveling as you pull them apart, if you pull really fast, they just tangle into a knot, which is really frustrating. So fits them in half. I'm going to knot one end before I go any further, do the 2 little overhand knots. And I'm not sure if I'm saying your name correctly, Nicole, but we are using the 780 right now. It depends if you're doing summer or winter. But if you're doing winter, it's 780, and if you're doing summer, it's 729. So that's my double knot at the end, and then I'm just going to separate out the threads right near the knot, and then I kind of just hold them apart and just run my fingers down slowly. See how it's starting to knot there? Just got to go slowly. And that unwinds them nearly. There we go. And then I'll just smooth them back together. And I'm ready to start stitching. So I'm going to grab out my needle, same size as I was using last night. So if you've got one of our packs, I'm just going to use the second to largest size. So just to recap, we are using 3 strands on this stem of the sprig.
But like, you know, you can use whatever you feel comfortable with. There's no hard and fast rules. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch this one on top first. I'm just going to stitch the back stitch stem, and I'll talk through it as I go. It is what we covered last night, and you can just listen along if you're wanting to follow. So I'm going to bring my needle up at the top of, I'm going to bring it up at the top of the stem where it is basically where it's hitting the garland string. My needle's actually come up right in the middle of the garland string. Don't worry about it. Like you can bring your needle up just below it or in the middle. It won't really matter. So pull your thread all the way through until your knot is nicely held in at the back. And then as we do our first stitch, what I want you to think about, so we're going to do one stitch down the stem. Stitch length is something you definitely get better and better with in terms of consistency. So what I want you to check now is that when you flip it over and you've pulled all the slack through, that knot is hard up against the fabric still. It's really easy on that very first stitch to, by mistake, you feel like it's gone all the way through, but it actually hasn't. And then it'll feel taut enough. And then you start stitching along. And when you get to the end, you're like, oh, hello. So don't worry if that happens. It's happened to me plenty of times. There's actually a post in the group about how to fix it now. But yeah, just make sure your knot is still flush after that first stitch. And then bring your needle up again another stitch length ahead. Pull all the slack through. And then go back to cover up that gap with your back stitch. And there's been lots of people commenting. Oh, so then just keep doing that down the body of the sprig, the stem of the sprig. There's been lots of talk about keeping your stitch length in the group. I really don't think it's something you need to worry too much about as a learner. Like if you actually look closely at my patterns, I was pretty careful because I knew I was going to photograph these, but like that stitch there, can you see that? Is actually way longer than that stitch there. So as long as they're generally consistent, it will be fine. Cool. So just back stitch down the stem. And when you get, it doesn't really matter, but I stopped when I did that very last part of it is actually a piece of foliage. So just stop one little piece of foliage short of the end, and then we can do the last bit as green. But if you go right to the end of the line, that's fine too. So once I've got to the end, I'm going to show you how I knot it off again. Cindy says, I'm the worst person at keeping it the same length on my creations. So Cindy has shared some outstanding pieces of embroidery in our group, and you really can't tell. They still look amazing. Cool. So I've just stopped mine about there, okay? So if your head's down, just have a look. That's where I am. And if you want to look at how I knotted off, then have a look now. So just the same as last night, I'm going to weave my needle under the nearby stitch, not piercing the fabric. And as I pull the slack through, I'm leaving a little knot, and then I'm going to go back through that, poke my needle back through it to make a knot. Don't pull super tight because you just can slightly, you don't want to pull your stitches on the front out of shape. So at this point, I could just cut off the tail there, but what I'm going to do instead is, just to make it a little bit tidier, I'm going to just weave back along the way I came, just weaving my needle under some more stitches. Once again, there's nothing happening on the front side here. This is all just happening on the back. And now I know that that little tail is just tucked under where I've been. So I'm going to snip it off really close. And how tidy does that look? Remind me later. I'm going to show you some of my projects where the underside is not that tidy, and it really doesn't matter. It's something that you can just get better and better at. But I'm just going to make a note to tell you about thread shadows when I have a second later, because that's the whole reason one of the reasons we want to tidy the back, so we don't leave like shadows of what's happening on the back that you see through from the front. I'll cover it in a bit. Grab your dark green and whip off a piece of that and separate that out into 3 strands as well. or if you're doing the summer palette, which I agree is delicious, this you're doing the 503 for the foliage. When I made the winter palette, I spent quite a long time changing around the colors and things. When I made the summer one, I just made it first go and it was the perfect colors. So there you go. All right, so separate out, everyone's ready? Okay, so separate out your strands for the green, the foliage, and just knot that again, just like we've exactly the same as what we've just done. Some of you have done the sprigs already before we started, so I hope you're enjoying any tips. And I'll do this a couple of times, so don't worry if you are behind. I'm going to stitch a whole nother one. I'm going to be sneaky here and leave my brown on my needle to use for my next stem. I'm going to get another needle to thread up my green. Because if I can minimize how many times I thread my needle, I will. All right. Isn't it fun that we could just get straight into the stitching tonight? Okay, so I'm going to show you how to stitch the sprigs. Now, sorry, I'm going to teach you how to stitch the foliage on the sprigs. So basically, we're just going to do a single straight stitch for each part that comes off. Yes, Katrina, it's 3 strands. So we're doing 3 strands of the dark green, that's the 937 or the 503. Yeah, but you can do more or less if you want. So with a straight stitch, you might be thinking, what is that? It's literally just one stitch that is straight, of course. And the way I think of a straight stitch is it's a stitch that's not part of a line. So you can use a straight stitch on its own, or you could use a whole lot of straight stitches to build up a design. Like we're using a whole lot of straight stitches here that we're stitching one after the other, and they are making up the sprig. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. So this is this daisy blooms pattern. All of these yellow or gold pieces you see coming out, they are just straight stitches, whereas the beautiful cream color underneath, those stitches are all basically laying flush to each other to create a satin stitch. And on this one, this is called seed stitch, this little one here, but really all seed stitch is just a whole lot of little straight stitches placed at random. So straight stitch is just a really handy technique to know. It's basically the easiest one. Yeah, so let's do it. Okay, so you can stitch this. I stitch it from the out. I bring my needle up on the outside and duck it down in on the stem. You could do the opposite, and you could go all down one side and up the other. I'll just show you the way I do it. So bring your needle up on the left-hand side of that top piece of foliage and just bring your thread right through so that the knot is sitting on the back, just like you would if you were starting back stitch. And just feel free to watch me do the first few before you start. And then I'm just going to follow that line, and where it meets the stem, I'm going to put my needle down there. And that is a straight stitch. So now I'm just going to do exactly the same on the other side. So I'm going to bring my needle up at the far end of that piece of foliage and then back down on the stem. So that's your 2 straight stitches. I'm going to now bring my needle up in the far left side of the next one down on the left side. Pull all that slack through and then just go down on the stem. Now, when you go down on the stem, you can either go down just beside it, or you can go down, you might end up going down where your back stitches meet, or you can just go down straight in the middle of the stem and split the stitches. It really won't, any option looks great. So then I'm just going to bring my needle up at the far side of the next one down and then back in on the stem. So that's just basically how you do it. You just work your way down, doing stitch on the left, bringing your needle up at the far end and then down again on the stem, and then on the other side. Yeah, and I'll show this again on the next one. So So is there a maximum length? That is a great question. I'm just going to quickly show Andrea how to do this, and then I'll answer that awesome question about the maximum length. So Andrea, just pretend that this is the top stitch of pretend I'm working on that one. So you just bring your needle up at the far end of it and bring through all the slack, so your knot would be sitting on the underside, and then just go back down and on the stem. So you complete that stitch, and then you just go to the other side and bring your needle up at the far end and then back in on the stem again. So you can do straight stitches, like you could have them all radiating out from a middle point to make a star, or you could cross them over each other to make a cross. Like you really can do what you like. Can you just, I'll just show you how to knot this off and then I'll answer that question. So my thread basically did that whole sprig. It's possibly slightly short here, but let's just knot it off. So once again, just do exactly the same thing. You just have to be a bit careful you don't catch the other stitches. So just duck under the, I'm just going to duck it under where the base of the stem is. I actually just ducked it under once, and now I'm going to go back through that hole. If your needle doesn't actually have enough length, you can actually poke the other end of the needle through, and then it will still just work if you haven't left quite enough. So that's what I did then, and then I'm just going to carefully, without catching on all those stitches, I'm just going to tidy that tail away and then cut it short. So yeah, once you guys have done a sprig, can you please comment and let me know? I might just stitch this other little one here while I'm waiting so that I can talk it through in case anyone's got any questions, and then we'll go on to one of the geometric baubles. So I'm going to use the other half of my, oh no, I had my needle threaded already. Yes, here it is. So we will move on to the geometric bauble. So if you, just let me quickly stitch one more and then we'll do it. So I'm doing the stalk or the stem. I'm just going to back stitch the stem. I think we all are getting the hang of back stitch now. So what I might do actually is show you how to sew this back stitch. So let me just quickly show you how to sew back stitch in case you missed that last night. So when you, what I have been showing you up till now is stabbing, the stabbing method. And the stabbing method is when you pull all the slack through in your thread on each side of the stitch. So you know how we stitch one side of the stitch, we pull all the slack through, and then we come back up and we pull all the slack through. And it's just I find the easiest way, and I normally stab. But let me just quickly show you how to sew. So sewing is when you basically scoop the fabric and you do it in like one movement. So let me see. So see here, I've going down into that stitch, but I'm actually just going to come up where I would have in the next stitch, and I'm going to pull that through. And you actually you're doing twice the amount of work in one motion. So that is how to sew backstitch. You can just have a play with it if you want. I tend to stab because I find it I'm way more precise. But like my stitches all ended up slightly different lengths then. But yeah, it's a great skill to have if you want to learn how to sew your stitches. And it is, I think once you get the hang of it, it is faster. And I just I tend to, I don't know if you noticed then, but as I'm sewing, I kind of push the fabric up a little bit so that my needle can kind of stay in place well. But yeah, I think there's a whole lot of tips and tricks for doing sewing that we could do a whole nother workshop on that. Oh, Ree, you haven't been doing the sewing technique. Wow, there you go. Even our seasoned embroiderers can learn something new. The thing that with the sewing, actually, what I should mention is if any of you want to do my project in the new year, that's embroidery onto clothes, you actually kind of need to know how to sew your stitches for clothing that you can't get at the back. So like a jean pocket. I just sewed this jean pocket. Where's the best way to show you? And because you can't really get at the back of it, I had to sew all my stitches because you just couldn't go right through, like there was no clear ear underneath. So yeah, I think it's helpful to learn the sewing technique for expanding your embroidery skills. Okay, I'll just quickly do this last sprig for anyone wanting to look. So coming up on the far side, bring it down, just down in a whole series of straight stitches, and then that little guy will be done. Oh, so that's so interesting. I can't see whose name this is, but they've said that they think sewing gives them more even stitches. So that's awesome. Like if that's what you find, then please go for it. It's all just about finding what's most enjoyable and comfortable for you. And once you've got that, then I just say go for it. So I'm doing this way too fast and nearly getting myself in knots. So here we go. I'll just knock that off, and then let's do the geometric bauble. So grab the color of the first bauble on the top, the geometric bauble. Hi, Carolina. Welcome. So what you want to do is, so we're going to move on from the sprigs now. You've seen how to do them, and you can finish that one off as soon as you're ready. But let's now do this geometric bauble here. So if you are doing the winter colorway, can you please get the 977 color? And if you're doing summer, it is the lighter orange. So it's the orange in either. So it's the dark orange for winter or the light orange, 3854 for summer. And just cut off a piece, your normal 30 centimeter size, but we're not going to separate it out in half this time. We're going to stitch with all 6 strands of floss. Oh, Avril has said that the tension on her sprigs is either too tight or too loose. Yeah, I think that you'll just, with practice, you just want to pull, when you pull each stitch, you want it to be, you don't want to pull it so tight that you're like creating a hole where the thread's coming through the fabric. But you want it to be tight enough that your stitch is flush and just sitting nice and flat on the fabric. Like you don't want it to be wobbly. So don't worry, that will come with practice. Oh, and I didn't answer that question about your stitch length with satin with a straight stitch. Yes, 977 is the one. I'll put them here in front of me. So it's just like satin stitch, which is a whole series of straight stitches beside each other. If your stitches are too long, they get quite wobbly and they don't have that lovely tension, especially if you take them out of a hoop and like want them on like a piece of clothing, for example. I'm going to advise people to do quite short stitches. So yes, with the sorry, I must answer that first. So with how long your satin stitches are, like I wouldn't be doing more than like a couple of centimeters even. But it's modern embroidery. You can kind of do what you want. So I definitely do see a lot of modern embroidery patterns that do really long straight stitches. So yeah. But the longer the stitches, the more likelihood it will get a bit loose. All right, so yes, I would recommend you get a bigger needle. So in this pack, I'm going to get the biggest needle out, and I believe that that is the needle with the lowest number. I have researched this so much because I always get it wrong, and I am 98% sure that the lower the number, the bigger the needle. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, grab your so what I'm going to do now is I've got my thread. I am going to unwind it. So I've knotted the end. So I'm just going to do exactly the same way. So I'm separating them out just like I do. I separate them out in groups of 3 by the knot. So I'll just separate that out 1/2. And then I'll just leave those there, and then I'll separate out this half. All right, now, when you are threading 6 strands of floss on a needle, it can be a little bit frustrating. So Can you guys comment once you're threaded your needle with the 6 strands of floss and you're ready to start your bauble? Just remember my tips. So I line up my threads, snip them across so that you've got a nice clean cut. Pinch it right near the end. Can you guys see what I'm doing? And then I kind of line them. I actually line it up so they're all the threads are like in a row, and then I line the eye of my needle up along in the same way, and that worked. Thank God. By the numbers on the needle, don't worry, they don't have numbers on them, but I just mean if you got one of our multi-packs, it says sizes 3 to 9. They're not actually numbered though, so I'm pretty sure that number 3 is the bigger one and number 9 is the smaller, I think. All right, let's get started. So if you are still threading your needle, why don't you just stop now and watch what I'm doing, and then you can join in. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the top and back stitch right around. And then we're going to get to the top and we're going to stitch down that part and then up that part. And then that will be the bauble done. So let's go. And I'll do a couple of these. So if you are just watching, then you can do it with me in the next one. So bring your thread through. It's just back stitch. It's exactly what we've learned. Okay, so do that first stitch and then make sure that your knot is sitting nice and flush on the underside, because you know how it can pop out. Mine actually had popped out a bit then. And then just back stitch your way right around the circumference of the bauble. Is that the right word? Yes, Matt's an engineer, so he would know. And with these stitches, I am doing them a little bit, I'm actually doing them a little bit shorter because I quite like that look. And also when you're working on a curve, if you want to get that smoother shape, the rule of thumb is that the tighter the curve, the smaller your stitches will need to be to go around it. So I kind of find I have to do shorter stitches to keep on that nice curve. I'll just measure one out of interest's sake. I really don't want you guys measuring your stitches. I just want you to enjoy it. But yeah, these are about 2 mils instead of 3. So yeah, just work your way right around. You guys can see what I'm doing. And you might find now that we're using 6 strands, it is a little bit, kind of feels a bit rougher. So yeah, it is a little bit of a different feeling. I find it is more likely to tangle when you've got 6 strands. So just go slowly. Like see there, you can see how it's just sitting on top. If you pull that really fast sometimes, it actually knots on top. So frustrating. I am going to give you a few tips on how to fix a mistake at the end of this session as well. Just saw a comment from Livy. Thank you for coming along, Livy. Livy is an amazing weaver, and that is what I think is her first love, but she's having to fight that because she's actually really enjoying embroidery now. You can love them both, you know. I do. And punch needle. And there's other crafts that I won't even let myself get started on because I know I'll love them too. Whenever I say, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll try a new craft. Like I really want to do macrame and obviously teach it. And I get daggers across the room from Matt because we put so much time and effort into making all of my courses. We're just going to wait a bit before we take on any more. Oh, I can't see your name, but someone's finally got the needle threaded. I feel your pain. I've been there. Cool. So once you've stitched right around the bauble, I'll just give it a second because I know I'm really fast. But basically, I want you to bring your needle up at the top so that your thread is on the top side. And just be careful when you do that you don't get caught on the knot, because on the underside, your knot is hanging out there at the top. Your knot is hanging out there at the top. So when you bring your needle through, just be careful you don't get caught on it. Once you are at the point where you've gone right around, oh gosh, I'm not actually in the middle here. Then here's what to do. So if you're still working your way around, just watch me. So I've brought my needle up at the top before I do my next stitch. And then I'm just going to go down on that left line and just work my way down to the bottom. That sound is so satisfying, isn't it? And I think you hear it a lot more when you use 6 strands of floss. And just look at that awesome chunky texture. I definitely find with 6 strands of floss too, it's really obvious when you haven't unwound and regroup your threads, because they sit really nice and flat on the fabric when they've been nicely unwound and prepared, whereas if they're all twisted up, they just don't sit as nicely. So I'm right near the bottom of the bauble. I'm going to bring my needle up right at the bottom, basically on the line, and then duck it back down to do that last stitch. Now we're going to stitch back up this side. You could just start there and do a back stitch, but I just think it's better in terms of the shadows on the back. Bring your needle up at the very bottom again. So you're kind of, oh, I actually just caught my stitch there. Just be careful you don't catch it on that last stitch, but I just did that and I've pulled it tight and it's fine. Then head up that line. So you don't have to do it exactly as I am. All I want you to do is cover those lines with back stitches. You can kind of do it in whatever order you like, but this is just what I found the easiest. All right, and then on that very last stitch, once again, just be careful as you bring your needle up, you don't get in a tangle with your knot. Cool, and that is geometric bauble. So look at the back. So it is so pretty on the back. It's actually, you basically have done split stitch on the back, but you've done back stitch on the front. So just do your little weaving under to make a knot on the back when you're ready, and then tidy away that tail under some stitches before you snip it off. And then that's basically all you need to know to do what we need to do tonight. So what I'm going to do now is, I know that some of you are waiting to see it from the start again. So I'm just going to stitch this other one, but just continue as you are. So all the colors are in the guide, but it is 758. So it's the pink. It's basically the dark pink on both. So it's 758 on winter and 352 on summer. Some of you have been asking what you do with your thread. So this is what I did with mine when it got quite short. I just bundled it all up together and put it in the little wrapper. It doesn't come off as easily, but yeah, you'd think that I would be, of everyone, would be really big on having beautiful, amazing display ways to store thread, but I personally, I go through so much thread. I'll show you my thread storage box that I just can't even face putting it onto bobbins because it would take me so long, and I kind of go through it so fast anyway. So I'll just quickly unravel and smooth out my threads. It's all very quiet on the questions. You all must be concentrating really hard. We've been able to do it a bit slower tonight too, which has been nice. Okay, so I'll just quickly go over how to do the bauble. So bring your needle up at the top. Yes, we're going to do the little hangers, but we're going to do them on Friday night, actually. I'll explain in a second. So bring your thread up, your knot's right at the back, nice and flush with your fabric. It's the darker pink. And then just do a series of small little back stitches right around the circumference of the bauble. And just check after that first stitch, is my knot still nice and flush on the back? What you can do too, like I can tell that stitch there is sitting a bit funny. So sometimes I just use my needle and I make it, if your threads are all kind of tangled, I just pull it up again and then I pull it flush, and that just makes it sit a lot nicer. All right, so then just go right around the circumference until you get to the top, and do your stitches slightly smaller than you would so that you can get, you can follow that nice curve shape. Okay, so while I'm doing this, right, now how to fix a mistake. So let's say you got to here and you're like, oh no, that last stitch was totally wonky. My child just gave me a fright. So what you can do is I just use the other side of my needle and I just gently actually pull it up, and then you can flip it over and you can actually just do that to remove some stitches. You sometimes just have to give it a little feel, like depending on what kind of stitch you're doing. You can just feel around like where it has slack to pull up. I would only recommend doing that though if it's not too many stitches, because your thread, like sometimes it's just better, you're just better to snip it out and start again. So yeah, I can redo those stitches now, but sometimes you are better off just starting again, because especially if your threads have got a tangle on the top, like it's pretty hard to fix that. And also your threads can get, your threads can get quite worn. Like I can see these, like once you've gone in and out of fabric lots of times, you will find that even these awesome quality DMC threads do start to get ever so slightly fluffed up. So sometimes if your threads got all tangled, by the time, oh, see, I got in a little, almost knotted that, but I managed to pull through it. Yeah, sometimes you're better off just snipping it off, and hopefully you'll end up with a tail that you can get a needle on at the back to tidy. Sometimes if it's in a major knot though, it has knotted itself off enough that you don't have to worry too much at the back. It's going to secure. Okay, so go right around the circumference, and then I just like to bring my needle up again at the top. Just careful you don't catch on your knot, and then work your way down the left side and then up the right. And that's how you do the geometric bauble. So I had two more things I want to quickly talk to you about before I go. One is thread shadows. So when you're stitching along, I just want you to be conscious. I've designed this pattern so we didn't really have to worry about it, but basically one of the reasons we tidy away our tails is that, you know, like if you hold your pattern up to the light, and it does kind of happen on these sprigs, you can actually see the shadow of thread underneath. Like, can you see on the sprig there? Because when we did each straight stitch, we kind of just moved to where the next one started. And so that does mean at the back, the line of threads at the back is slightly different to what's on the front. So then if you held it up, you can see a shadow of where those threads are on the back. So it's just something that you generally want to avoid in your embroidery, because if you've got fabric that you can see through it all, then it shows up. And it's not a major, but just so that's why sometimes, like when we're stitching along, I try, like you might, you know how we do that little thing where we weave the tails in under the stitches that are already there? You can sometimes do that to get from one point on a pattern to another. So like I might actually teach you this while we do that, when we do the hangers. Like you can do the hanger there, and then you wouldn't just move your thread from there to there, because at the bottom you might see that shadow. So you could cut it off and knot it and start again, or you can weave your thread under along a line of thread and then keep stitching. So I hope that makes sense. It's just something that is something you want to be aware of in your overall embroidery journey. And yeah, the only other thing I want to show you is that someone had mentioned the back of their piece looked like a hot mess in the group. And I was like, don't worry, because no one's going to be looking at the back. But I'll show you some of mine I'll show you the difference between some of my work and someone who has been embroidering for decades. Oh, and what I was going to say is some people use two pieces of fabric when they stitch, and that means that like they literally put two pieces of fabric in their hoop, and that means you can't really see the shadows through the back of the threads, which is a great idea. And Yes, and you can back it. So I'll show you a couple of those things now. So yeah, you can back it. So I have started doing this on mine. So this is my Winter Wonderland pattern, and I actually put a piece of cardboard in the back before I did my running stitch. So I'll talk about more of this on when I do the finishing, and that means that you couldn't really see that, could you? That it has a really nice solid look to it, and there's no light shining through. But the other way to back a pattern is you can do felt. So you can actually back it with a piece of felt, and you do a whip stitch around it. I have a tutorial for that in my membership. And lots of people do that, especially if you're giving it as a gift. It looks beautiful and no one can see what's happening on the back, right? So lots of people who sell embroidery do that, or they might do the piece of cardboard and they'll glue it in and then finish it off. I've seen there's heaps of different ways you can do it, but I just wanted to show you one of my patterns, what the back looks like, because it does look like a hot mess. Yeah, I don't normally show people this, but this pattern, when I added the snow at the end, I moved all over it. And yeah, check that out. That is not tidy. Versus this pattern here is one that I sometimes I get some help stitching up my patterns just to check that they are all workable. And the lady who stitched this one up has been embroidering for like 50 years kind of thing. And look at the back. It is amazing. Can you see that? So when I saw this, I actually opened it up in the post and I looked at it that way and I was like, oh, it looks, I was kind of like, oh, that doesn't look as good as when I did it. And then I was like, oh my goodness, that's the back. And I flipped it over and I was like, oh, wow. So this was the back of what I did, which I actually thought was pretty tidy. But you can see the difference, hers and mine. So I am just showing you that out of interest's sake. I don't want you to worry what the back of your patterns look like, but as you get more experience, you get better at it. And if you want to delve into not using knots at all, like you can do something called an away knot, where you like make a knot on the top of your fabric and then you start your stitches further away and stitch them, and then you cut the knot off and tidy that up. It's a whole nother process, so I don't really do it much, but it does mean that your patterns can look really tidy on the back. Welcome to the third night of our Christmas Charms Embroidery Workshop. So tonight we are going to be learning French knots. And I think for a lot of people, this is their favorite part of the workshop from my past experience. So French knots are one of those stitches that are so beautiful and have so much texture. And they just, I feel like they kind of make your projects, just take them to the next level. They are definitely quite challenging though. And I often have comments from people who are like, I've been trying these for years and I just can't get them to work. And then like in the last workshop, there were a couple of people who were like, you're not going to be able to get me to do them. And by the end, they were like, I'm doing them. So my goal by the end of this is that you can all comfortably do a French knot. And I'm going to help you get there. I'm just going to give you a bit of a lowdown on the French knot. So while I do, just go around and give your fabric a tighten in your hoop. I did definitely notice in quite a few of the pictures in the Facebook group, I think you could tighten up your fabric a bit, and that's cool. Like it doesn't matter. And often by the end of a session, it gets a bit looser, but just feel free to try and make it really nice and firm in your hoop. It'll just help. And you can choose your colors. So with the pattern, so today we are going to be doing what I have called in the pattern the bubbly baubles. So we did the geometric ones and now we're going to do the bubbly ones. So in terms of the winter color palette, it's 758, 977 and 945. That's the three colors you need to get out. Oh, don't worry. If someone wants to type in those colors in the comment box, it just means I get lots of questions about what colors it'll be there for everyone to see, but it doesn't matter. So 977, 945 and 758. And then if you are doing the summer version, you have the light pink, the light blue, and the light orange. So that is 3, 8, 5, 4, 9, 2, 8, and 7, 5, 4. So grab out your colors, but you know what? Here's something that might just, oh, thank you, Victoria. I don't unwind, thank you, Karen. I don't unwind my threads when I do French knots. I just whip it straight off the roll and stitch with it. And it always works just fine for me. And I think because of the way you're doing a French knot, it's all getting twisted up, and I don't find it as any kind of worry for me that I just don't need to unwind my threads. So feel free to, I'm giving you a leave pass on that. You can skip that step tonight if you want, but I'm sure if you unwind them, that will be fine too. Cool. So what I want to show you before we get started is some different options for your pattern. So this pattern, I feel like it's a really, it's a fun pattern. It's really forgiving. You can change it up. If you get different colors, that's cool. So I thought quite long and hard about the French knots in this, and they definitely take a bit longer, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by the French knots. So if you were following the pattern the way you see it here, we basically fill in the entire bauble with little French knots with 3 strands, and I basically stitch the outer and then I fill it in. And I really enjoy doing French knots, so that's awesome, and I quite liked the texture it created. But I know some of you will be like, yeah, let me at them. I'm loving them. I want to just methodically do a whole bunch of French knots and zone out, and you'll just really like it. But some of you might find them a bit more challenging, and that is cool. So I've come up with some options for you. So not so much that you might find them challenging too, but it will take a little while, and I don't want you to feel like this is taking too long to make progress and for you to feel that sense of achievement. So you can do, and this looks really cute too. So on this one here, I've just done the outer circle in French knots on all 3 as per the colors in the pattern. And I think that looks super cute too. So it's the standard way, and that is just doing the outer circle. So that takes way less time, but you still get a really beautiful result. Or you could do the French knots with 6 strands. So I will do 6 strands for you, but you could just start with 6 strands right from the get-go if you want. And that's them there. So I'll just show you a comparison. How close I can get it. So that is 3 strands. Is that in focus? And then that is 6. So it's just a little bit chunkier, and it'll fill in the space twice as quick. So you'll still get that awesome textured look, but it'll be chunkier and faster. I mean, we're not here to do fast crafting. I really want you to slow down, but you still will be slowing down to do that. And then I have one other option. So, a couple. You could actually do, with this one here, I did the border with 6 strands, so the chunky look just in the border. So that's kind of a combo of both. And then I actually thought about it because I noticed so many comments from you coming in saying my bauble looks wonky. And I thought, I don't want people to find that tricky with doing the French knot. So I have another option. If you want to, you could stitch around the outside of the bauble in backstitch. So then you can feel a bit more in control with the line. And then you could just do a little dusting of French knots on the inside. It's kind of as close as you want. Like you could just do a few here, or you could actually fill it in. So that is some options. And you could even go around with backstitch after if you wanted. Yeah, so we're not here to be perfectionists. If your baubles are beautifully oval or slightly diamond shaped, then that's cool. But I just wanted to give you options so that you feel like you can do what you'll enjoy the most. As with all of these, I'm going to show you lots of times how to do the French knot. So why don't you just watch along for the first one, and then don't worry, I will go over it. I'll probably end up doing about 5 where I just go through every single step and all my tips. So don't worry if you don't get it straight away, and ask questions and I will not leave you behind. Okay, so I am going to start with this top one here. So that is the pink color. Come off. So I'm going to start with 3 strands. I just think, I don't know. Some people say they find 3-stranded ones. I always thought that they were easier than doing it with 6 strands, but then some of the people last workshop said they found the 6 strands easier. So I think it doesn't really make a difference. Okay, so just make a knot at the end, just like we always do with all these stitches. Just go ahead and make your double knot. Don't worry about unwinding your threads, and grab and then thread your needle. There was a really helpful post in the group today about a needle threader that is much more sturdy than some of the other ones. So thank you. I think it was Emma who posted that. Thank you so much. But yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes it takes longer, and oh, that worked. All right, so I would just encourage all of you to just watch me do this first one. So in the pattern, I say to start with doing the border. I'm just going to do a few on the inside, and you might want to do that too just to get the hang of it. So pull your thread through from the back, and just like we always do, so that your knot's at the back holding it in place. Okay, and so for this technique, you need both hands. I wonder if I can angle that a bit down. No, hang on. Okay, so for this technique, you need both hands. So I'm going to talk about this hand that's holding your needle being your stitching hand, and I'm going to call this one your free hand, the one that isn't holding the needle. Okay, so my thread's actually a bit twisted, so I'm just going to unravel that a bit. All right, so we've pulled all the slack through, and we've got the needle here in our stitching hand. And what you want to do is grab that tail, see where the thread's coming out from the fabric. Just grab that with your free hand and just gently hold it there. And then we're going to take the needle and hold it kind of parallel to the fabric underneath, like towards you from where the thread's coming out of the fabric. So, what size needle? Just one of the ones nearer to the bigger. I use the second to largest needle in the pack. And oh yeah, thank you. Someone's already answered that. So holding the needle, what you want to do is you want to hold it parallel to the fabric, and you're not holding it up here above where the thread's coming out of the fabric. You're holding it underneath, like towards you, compared to where the thread's coming out of the fabric. Okay, so just hold your needle there, and then you're going to use your free hand, and you're going to wrap the thread close to where it comes out of the fabric twice around the tip of your needle, and you kind of do it about a third of the way up the needle. So I'm kind of pushing the needle back against the thread there, but I'm going to go 1, 2. So I've wrapped it twice around. Hopefully you could see that. And then, so we've now got, I'm just kind of holding on the tension with my free hand. And then I'm going to gently pull the tip of the needle back. And I'm just going to poke it slightly into the fabric just beside where I came up. And then I use my free hand to like pull on a bit of pressure. So you actually see the knot travel down to sit on the surface of the fabric. So that's just done by the pressure of me pulling with my free hand. And the needle's just slightly poked into the fabric. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my free hand to hold the tail of thread hard against the fabric. So I'm securing it there, and I'll push the needle in a little bit more. So that needle can now just hang out there on its own. My stitching hand is now free, and I'm going to pull it underneath, and I'm going to pull the needle through with my that same hand, and I just give it a little bit of a swivel, like a corkscrew, and see how I'm just pulling that tail of thread down, and I'm still using my free hand to like hold the slack, not too tight, but just a bit of pressure, and now I can let it go. Just really slowly pull down, and there is a French knot. I'm glad that worked. So I'm going to show you that again. So you might want to stitch along with me this time. So that is a little French knot. I hope that you could see that. I'll try and do this one on a little bit more of an angle. This is just such a fine thing. We've invested in a really good camera so that you can see, and I hope you can. Okay, so I'm just going to I'll bring up my needle a little way away just so you can see what's happening. So I'm not sure what you mean, Brittany, by am I turning the needle underneath? I kind of swivel it as I pull it through, and that just helps it pull through. So we've pulled the needle up to the top again, and we've got the thread coming out of the fabric. And once again, I'm going to just gently hold the tail with my free hand, and I'm using my stitching hand. I'm going to pop the needle parallel to the fabric underneath where it's coming out, where the thread's coming out of the fabric. And you kind of push back against the fabric almost so that it's got a bit of tension. And then I use my free hand, so the thread goes down and over and around the needle twice, around about a third of the way up. And then it's all kind of held here in place just because I'm using my free hand to hold a bit of pressure on. So then the goal now is to poke your needle down into the fabric. So in order to do that, you kind of have to pull it back a bit, and I'm still using my free hand to hold the tension on. And then you can just poke your needle down a little bit, just beside where you came up, like a millimeter away. And then you kind of, I guess I pull my needle more upright, and I use my free hand just to gently pull some tension on. So at that point, I poke my needle down a little bit more, and then you can actually let it go because it's all holding itself there. Your free hand's holding on the tail, and the needle's poked down enough that you can just let it go. Now, at this point is when you put your hand underneath and pull the needle through. So by this point, because you've pulled on the tension there on that on the tail, you can see the little knot has actually traveled down your needle to sit on the fabric. And then as you reach under, you can actually, I actually just push the needle through a bit more so that I can get a good grip on it underneath. Now, it's really key when you do this step of pulling the needle through, you'll get a feel for it, but you just want to hold enough tension on the slack that you're not like choking your needle. Like if I pull really tight, hang on, you kind of balance your hand on the side of your hoop, wherever's closest, and then you can hold that slack. But if I pulled really tight, then it's really hard to get your needle down through. So you just want to have enough ease on it that you can pull the needle through. And sometimes it's like a corkscrew. I'm kind of just swiveling it down. And then the key is to go quite slow with this pulling through, because if you go really, really fast, you often end up with a little loop on top of your knot, which I think that should look quite cute, but I think that happens because you go so fast. Oh, yay. Megan, loving these. Bethany, I've never been able to do one before. It's beautiful. Whoop, whoop. I did it and love it. Oh, that's so cool. Someone's done it twice. Oh, awesome. Okay. So I know that not everyone will have it yet. So what I might actually do is I'm going to talk through another one using 6 strands, which you might just be able to see it a bit better. But if you're getting the hang of it, you can choose now how you want to do your bauble. Like, do you want to go around the border, or do you want to just do a little dusting on the inside? Whatever suits you. But actually, before I switch to 6 strands, I'll show you another one, and I'll show you how you actually place it where you want it to go. Okay. So if I'm doing a knot on the border, oh, can you see what I'm doing there? I'm pulling my needle up just on the inside of the line. Okay. And then when I make my knot, what I'm going to do, and don't worry, I'll go through it step by step again, but I just want to show this point. What I'm going to do is the knot's basically going to sit in between where you come up and go back down with your thread. So I know if I've brought my needle up just beside the line on the inside, if I want my knot to sit on top of the line as I go around the border, then I want to poke my needle back down on the other side of the line. Like if I put my needle down to the left now, my knot's going to sit on the line. But if I poked my needle down to the right, it would sit to the right. Does that make sense? So you can really choose your placement by where you poke your needle back down. So I'll just show you that. So I've come up there. Hope you can see this. And then I'm going to poke my needle down just past the line. And look, see how my knot is right on that border. And that is perfect. So I will swivel my needle down, and that's where I want it. So if I was to do my next one, I'm just going to do exactly the same thing. And you'll get an idea if you look at how big your knots are, but you kind of just want them to sit. If you're trying to fill in a space with it, You just want them to sit sort of flush against each other. And it is really, then you're not going to get a perfect circle. Like I don't. If you actually look at mine closely, it's not. But that will get you kind of close. So I'll do some in 6 strands. So I'm just going to do 1 knot on the 6 strands, and I'm not unwinding it. All right. So what I want to do is go through it again, absolutely step by step. And this time I'll use 6 strands so that it's easier to see. Sky, I'm doing 6 and feel like a genius. That's awesome. Yeah, if you are with the 6 strand one, is it best to go around the outline then fill it in? I found it easier to go around the outline. I basically did a circle, and then I did a circle on the inside of that, and then on the inside of that. So I might do that now. Why don't I do that now so you can see? And it's the same theory if you're using 3 strands, but this will just be a bit quicker for me to show you with 6. Oh yes, so can you just so with the 6 strands, it's definitely harder to pull it through because it's just thicker, and yeah, and you'll feel it go pop as it comes through. But yeah, that kind of swivel where you go back forth is really helpful. Let's just go through it from the start. So pull all your slack through so that the knot is on the back. And I've just come up just on the inside of that line. So let's actually turn it that way. I should have done it the other way. But yes, so then you hold the thread with your free hand where it's coming out of the fabric, just gently, so you've got a bit of tension on there. And then with your stitching hand, get the needle and hold it parallel to the fabric underneath where the thread's coming out of the fabric. So you kind of push it back on it a bit to create a little bit of tension. And then you bring with your free hand, you wrap the thread kind of near where it comes out of the fabric around once towards you and twice around the needle. And you're just kind of holding on a bit of tension now. So you've got the needle gripped in your right hand. Oh, it's kind of a bad angle there. And you've got the thread held with your free hand. And then the next goal is to poke your needle into the fabric just beside where you came up. And I'm going to do it on the other side of the line just so I can have my little knot sitting on the line. So I'm just going to bring the needle back, kind of angle it, and just poke it in right where I want it to go. And then I sort of straighten it up. And as you do, you just pull on a little bit of tension with your free hand so that you see that knot slide down onto the top of the fabric. I'm quite far from the side of my hoop now, but I'm just holding the side of my hoop, and I've got my thumb on the tail. And now I can just push the needle down a little bit more so it's secure. And at that point, we're all hanging out here in position, ready to go. So then just push the needle down a bit more and reach under and grab it with your free hand. And then I just give it a little swivel as I pull it through. You can feel it pop. And then, yep, my knot's looking good. And I'm just going to slowly pull the slack through. And there is my knot. Okay. Oh, yeah. So when you bring your needle up, how far away, you'll get a feel for it, depending on whether you're using 3 strands or 6. But I kind of look at how big the knot is. And then I think, like, let's just see. So I guess what I do is I bring it up sort of a knot's length away. That's a really good question. So I'm going to bring it up a knot length, the width of another knot away. Just trying to make sure you can see there. So then I'll pull that up, and that actually just leaves a nice gap there for me to put the next knot back towards the first one. So then I'll do my knot, and I'll poke the needle in right beside where the other one came up, what is sitting. And then if I pull through, that one just sits there nicely. You will really get the hang of how far away to place them. But if you end up with a gap, you can always go back and fill it, or just don't worry, no one will notice. Right, so, so many questions. Yeah, so you can wrap your thread once, twice, 3 times maybe, but I wouldn't go any more than that. There are bullion knots, which you may have seen on Instagram. People do amazing stitches where you basically like wrap your needle lots of times, and then you lay it flat on the fabric and you poke it down, and so it leaves like it's called a bullion knot, and they're amazing. And yeah, but I think if you're just doing a French knot, you can maybe experiment with 3, but I wouldn't go any more. Well, I mean, you can try, but it might start to go a bit haywire. They kind of topple over because you just end up with a high knot. So what I do is, you've kind of created a knot on the front anyway that is quite secure. So I'm not so fussy. I'll just do a couple more here so I can show you when there's a few more threads. So let's say, just let me build up a couple more, and then I'll show you how I tie it off. You'll definitely find, like I find with French knots, once you have the knack of it, if you just follow the same method, oh God, you can't even see what I'm doing. They will, oh, see what I've done there. My tail has actually got a bit tangled, and it's all tangled and won't go through. So that will sometimes happen. So in that case, I think I just went too fast and it was a bit tangled up before I even tried to do it. In this case, I haven't actually pulled the knot through yet, so I might be able to save it. So I'm definitely not going to be able to use that knot, but I'll just see if I can save the situation. So yeah, you really do have to concentrate, unlike me. I've still got more tips that I want to tell you. Oh, there we go. I've made a knot. So that's pretty much wrecked that. So I'm just going to snip that off. But I'll show you. Let's say that I had finished. My thread's got a bit unwound. Let's say that I had finished now and I wanted to knot off my thread. What I do is I just tuck under a couple of the, like you'll see on the underside, you're just making a whole bunch of little straight stitches. So I just tuck under a couple and then I just snip it off, which my thread was already snipped. But you can do a knot on the underside, but I don't think you have to worry too much about it. Okay, so I'm going to bring my needle up from the back, and so that the knot's just securing it on the back. And then, actually I do need this. And then, so you're using 2 hands for your knot. You're using your free hand to hold the slack that's like the thread as it comes up out of the fabric. And then you're using your stitching hand to hold the needle. So I'll just rotate it now. So I want to place my knot on the line. So I've just rotated my hoop so that I can do that. So just gently hold the thread where it comes out of the fabric with your free hand. Not really hard. You're not pulling really hard. You're just kind of holding on a little bit of tension. And then using your stitching hand, you want to hold the needle so it's kind of like parallel to the fabric. Yeah. And it's underneath where the thread's coming out of the fabric. So you're not holding it up here. You're holding it underneath. And then you just use your free hand. So hold your needle still there. And then about 1/3 of the way up your needle, you're going to wrap the thread close to where it's coming out of the fabric down and around your needle. So once and then twice. So you end up with the thread, you're holding it, the slack, and it's coming towards you around the needle. And everything's kind of held in place here now because you're holding your needle tight with your stitching hand and you're gently just holding the tension on with your free hand. So now you want to poke your needle back down through the fabric. So we're going to just maneuver it back a bit so that you can get a bit of angle. You're still holding your needle quite parallel to the fabric. And just poke your needle down 1 millimeter or so away from where you came up. And poke it in a little bit and then just kind of stand it up. And as you do, you just gently pull on a bit of tension and with your free hand, and that will make that little knot that you've made with your wraps travel down and sit on the surface of the fabric. So now you can pause and see what you've done. You can poke your needle down a little bit more at that point so that if you actually let it go, it would stay there. And then hold that. So then I just lift you need to kind of angle your hoop up a bit now so you can get at the back. And just with your free hand, hold that tail there, just nice and firmly against the fabric. And my hand's kind of gripping the edge of the hoop. And then now that we've got that, you can kind of adjust it a bit. Like that doesn't feel quite tight enough. So I'm just going to adjust that to be a bit tighter. And now, what's the best angle? Now I'm just going to reach under and pull the needle down. And I just give it a little corkscrew swivel. And you kind of feel it pull through with a bit of a pop, especially once you get past that tail. And then just gently keep pulling. And you see your knots there. And you're just gently pulling all the slack through until you pull it taut. What's that? Until you pull it taut. And that is your knot made. And then you can do another one. Yay, Nicole, you did it. Yep, when you, Jess, when you get a new piece of thread, you just start again like normal. Yep. Cool. Okay, I'm going to make some more. Now, what other tips do I have? So I think the key thing with these is that you're getting the right amount of pressure with your free hand and your stitching hand at that point where you're pulling the knot through, pulling the slack through. And it becomes quite naturally once you're used to it, but you don't want to pull it so tight that you're choking your needle and you can't actually get it down. But it does have to be firm enough that it holds the knot in place. Like if it's too slack here, your knot will just kind of unravel as you pull your thread down, and then you'll end up with a not very knotted knot. It's quite satisfying, isn't it? Oh, and the other thing you do need to be careful. Oh, don't do what I did then and just get your thread caught on the clasp, because then you're thinking, what on earth is going on? So don't stress out if you end up in a tangle, because it will happen. It happens to me lots, normally when I'm just needing to get something finished. Now, with this technique, we're using a normal embroidery needle, and you might notice that a normal embroidery needle is a little bit tapered, like it gets wider at the top. So if you were doing French knots by the book, I do believe you would use what's called a milliner's needle. Some of you might be able to, might have experience with them, but a milliner needle is like totally straight the whole way up. So we don't use them because I just want you to be able to use what supplies we've got, and I think we can make it work. But you can imagine using a needle that's completely straight it would just dive down through the fabric a lot easier. And I think that's what people use when they do the bullion knots, the longer ones, when you've wrapped around it heaps of times. So that's just something for you to know. So can you pull up that comment, Matt?
That one.
Christine, so for the baubles filled in with French knots, any tips to try and get a round shape? So if you started from the middle, what I would probably do, because you can always, I would kind of I would just go around the border, even if you've got some in the middle, just go around, like I'm guessing you probably haven't filled the whole thing in yet. You could just go around and do the border now and then fill in the gaps. So you can totally fill in gaps with your French knots, which I'll show you in a second. Like there's no kind of rules around how you fill in a shape. Yeah, you could totally do a spiral out from the middle. That would look amazing. So you do also notice, like my thread's got really wound up now. So I'm just going to let my needle, oh, can you see that? I just sometimes let the thread dangle down and the needle unwinds. And 6 strands of floss, it does get a bit worn if you have a really long piece of thread, because it's going in and out of the fabric with quite a bit of force a lot. So like my threads have just got a little bit out of whack there. So I'm just going to bring my needle right to the surface of the fabric and then smooth that out. Cool. So my thread's getting quite short now. You'll get a feel for it, but just don't try doing them with your thread too short. It is, I know when you get towards the end of your thread, you're like, I'll just try one more. But yeah, you'll find it painful. So I don't really have space here to fit one, but I'm going to squeeze one in there because you can kind of do that. So let's see how that looks. Yep, that works. So yeah, I'll show you how I knot this off now. So at the back, I'm actually just going to duck my thread under some stitches. Oh, 2's fine, but I'll just do 3. And then snip off the tail. All right. So tonight we are going to do, I'm going to teach you how to do the lazy daisy stitch. It's a really fun one. And we're going to use lazy daisy to do the holly leaves. And then we're going to do the bauble hangers. After we've done that, I'm going to show you how to remove your pin. And I'll show you how to do a really simple way to finish your hoop with just a little running stitch. So I'm thinking chances are you might still be finishing off your pattern by the time we get to the bit where I show you how to finish it, but that's okay. It won't be that long in the video, and you can just come back and watch it when I want you to be able to finish this at your own pace. I don't want you to rush with me tonight, and then you can finish it when you're ready. Cool. So what I want you to do is grab out, the first thing we're going to do is actually stitch the 3 French knots that make the top of the holly. So grab out the color. So if you're doing winter, it's 3, 5, 6. And if you're doing summer, it is that beautiful pinky, dark pink 3, 5, 2. So it's the darker kind of pinky red in either kit. And we will just quickly pop in those 3 French knots. So yeah, and you're all familiar with how to do French knots now, but I'll talk one through. I won't spend too long on this tonight because my main focus is on the other new techniques. But as you know, with French knots, I don't bother to unwind my floss. Feels like a little bit sneaky when you don't after doing it so much. All right, so let me position myself so I'm actually in the middle. And I'm just going to put this here to lean the hoop on. All right, so I'll just talk through one French knot, but with the French knots at the top of the holly, it's up to you if you use 3 or 6, but the pattern is using 6, and I think 6 looks quite fun just because it makes them a little bit chunkier for the berries. So 6 strands of the 3, 5, 6 or the 3, 5, 2. All right, so I'm going to start with this one at the top left. So let's just talk through one French knot. I'm going to start with the top one. So you pull your thread all the way through and you have your knot at the back, holding it nice and firm. And then you hold your needle underneath the thread where it's coming out of the fabric. And you're holding the tail of thread where it's coming out of the fabric with your left hand, with your free hand. And then you've got your needle parallel to the fabric in your stitching hand. And you wrap that thread once and then twice around the needle towards you. And then you're just holding it there. You've got just the right amount of pressure on so that that's staying nice and firm. And then we just want to poke our needle down into the fabric just beside where it came up. So you just pull your needle back a bit. And as you do, you're just keeping the tension on with your free hand. And then you poke the needle in a little bit and then straighten up your needle and use your free hand just to gently tug on the pressure. And that makes the knot travel down onto the top of the fabric. And then at this point, you can put your needle through a bit more and let go. Ta-da. And then you can poke it through a little bit more, reach on under, and just give it a little swivel to get it through. My hands are a bit slippery. You can kind of feel it pop with 6 strands. And now just my thread has just tried to get a bit, I could see the thread was trying to get caught there. So luckily I was going slow and it didn't. And then I just slowly pull all that slack through to make the knot. Someone was asking in the group, what causes you to get those little loops on top of your French knots? So just go on and do 3. I actually had that happen on one today. And it was because my knot got really loose when I was trying to pull it through, and then it ended up with a bit of a loop on top. So I think it's because you don't have enough tension on. You're not holding it quite tight enough as you pull your needle through. But I haven't isolated exactly what it is that causes those little loops on top. So if you are noticing they're happening, let me know. And you can kind of see why. Oh my gosh, my hand's really slippery. Sometimes you have to give it a real tug. Here we go. Okay. So I am just going to knot off I'm just going to weave my needle under a couple of stitches at the back just to kind of secure it off a little bit. And then I'm going to snip my tail and get ready to do the lazy daisies. Okay. Oh, good. And some of you are saying that you think it's the tension as well. So you guys can go ahead and stitch all 3 sets of the chunky French knots for the holly if you want. I'm just going to do the one so that I can move on to teaching you the lazy daisy. All right. So once you've done those 3 knots, grab your thread for the holly. So the holly is on the winter pattern, it is the lighter green. So that's 470. And on the summer pattern, the holly is that beautiful like silvery blue, the 928. So if you grab that out and take off a piece and split it into 3 strands, you've got your either your light green or your silvery blue, and split it into 3 strands. So what you might want to do is watch me do this, and then you can choose to either maybe do some lazy daisies with me before you go back to doing the rest of your knots, depending on how fast you are. Okay, so I'm just double knotting that as per normal. And then I am going to unwind my threads. I actually was in a real rush today I just always do my practice stitching before we start. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to see if I can not unwind my threads. And I think it did matter. They didn't feel like they were happening as nicely as normal. Okay, I'm going to grab out a needle that is slightly finer. So I'm going to grab out the needle that's second to largest. I believe that's number 5, but they don't have numbers on them. So I'm going to grab my second to largest needle and thread it. So you can use any amount of strands you want for these. I just like to teach you guys with 3, just because I think it's a little bit easier to get your needle threaded and it just passes through the fabric a bit easier, but it's totally up to you. They'll look quite nice and chunky with 6. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do the lazy daisy now. So it'd be great if you can just pause and watch so you can learn, okay? So we are going to make a loopy shape with our thread, and lazy daisy is awesome. I use it lots for petals and leaves, and you kind of get a lot of bang for your buck. Like it covers quite a lot of ground for one stitch. So you bring your needle up at the base of the petal, so like the pointy end, and bring your thread through just like we normally do, and you've got your knot on the underside. Okay, and then what we're going to do is put our needles down again in around about the same hole, but what we want to do is create a loop on top of the fabric before we pull all the slack through. So you could just poke your needle down and make a loop, but I found an easy way to do it is I kind of lay my thread out across, like on the left-hand side of where I want my petal or my leaf to go. And then I hold that there with my free hand. And now I'm going to poke back down right beside where I came up, and just be careful you don't catch your knot. So you can go down into the same hole, but you can go just beside it, and you can kind of feel if your knot's there. There'll be a little bit of resistance. So I can feel I'm okay. So I'm going to pull through, and I'm pulling through my slack there. But remember how I was just holding the tail of yarn with my free hand. So I'm holding that there, and I'm not going to pull all the slack through. I'm leaving a nice big knot, big loop. So now that loop is sitting out across where I want my my leaf to be. So I'm going to bring my needle up from the underside before I've pulled out all the slack through while there's still that loop. And I'm bringing up just on the inside of the outer end of the leaf. And then I'm going to pull it up right in the middle of that loop and see how, if I just gently pull that, that has made that nice loopy leaf shape. So the key is you bring your needle up in that loop and you don't pull it too tight, because if I pull too tight, it will go like that, which you might want for some stitches. But in this case, we want a really nice loopy leaf. So I'm just going to pull a bit of slack back out of that. You can actually kind of do that if you've pulled too tight. And I'm just going to really gently pull. And I always just pull away towards the end of the leaf or petal. You can just use your thumb to kind of hold it in place as you pull. And now just to secure that shape, I'm going to do a little stitch just over the end of the loop. And I'm just going to use my thumb to hold it nice and firmly as I pull the slack through so I don't pull it out of shape. And that is my little leaf. So underneath, you've got your threads coming out the back. So we can just go on and do our second one now. So I've made one leaf. Now I'm just going to bring my needle up again. I'm going to bring my needle up again at the pointy end of the leaf near where the berries are and pull all the slack through. And then I'm going to lay my tail of thread out across along where I want that leaf shape to be. And I'm just going to hold it there with my thumb. And then I'm going to put my needle back down where I came from. Just make sure you don't catch the knot. Pull all the slack through, but make sure you leave that loop. See how my thumb's making sure that loop's left there. And then on the underside, because my needle's on the underside, I'm going to bring the needle up again, just short of the end of the line. And then I'm going to pull the slack gently away from the holly, just until it looks, just go really slowly. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I can kind of use my fingers to shape it out into a leaf shape. And I'm going to use my thumb just to pull that slightly tighter. Happy with that? So once you've got the shape you want, just do a little stitch over the end of the loop. Just a tiny little stitch, just a little straight stitch, and hold it, keep holding it with your thumb while you tighten that stitch, and that's your second leaf. So I would love it if you could have a go and let me know how you're going, and I'll just keep talking it through, okay? So I'm showing you how to stab this stitch. You can actually sew it, but I never sew it, so I'm just going to leave it as stabbing for tonight. So we pull our needle up from the back at the pointy end of the leaf, like right up near the berries. This could be your first leaf or your third. And then we're going to put our needle back down through the same hole or just beside it. But so you could just put your needle down and then make a loop, but I just find it easier to arrange my thread first. So I just lay it flat against the direction I'm going to go. I want my leaf or petal to be in, and hold it with my thumb, and then I poke back down. That's just kind of a little hack I do. And then keep your thumb there while you pull. Oh, oops, actually, what am I doing? You don't need to pull. I was distracted by a comment. Don't pull your loop down to the size of the leaf until, like, make it bigger so that you've got plenty of space when you pull your needle back up. And then bring your needle up just short of the end of it. And then you pull the slack through. So your shape's smaller. Pull away just gently. And once you've kind of used your free hand to make it into the shape you want, then you do a little stitch over the end. And there are your three. And I'll show you how to knot it off. I did so many of these when I was doing my little when I was doing this little festive alphabet pattern. I made every letter, and I did a lot of lazy daisy petals, and they're also the inside of the orange segments. And I realized as I was doing it, you know, the technique where I hold the thread, I place the thread where I want it to go and hold it. I kind of realized I was doing that during the course of that pattern. So that's a little improvement to my tutorial. Okay, so I'm going to show you now how I knot that off. So if you guys could just pause and have a look as well. So I'm going to flip it over. There's that thread's, well, I've finished those three. So even if your thread was longer, I'd still just knot it off here and then start again. So as you can kind of see, there's not really a lot to work with here to do a normal little duck under and knot off. Like you've got a huge long stitch, and if you tried to do it against that, you might distort your actual lazy daisies. So you've got kind of got two options. You could just do a tiny little tuck under the fabric in that gap if you wanted. That's what I do sometimes. And then I create a loop and knot it off, and you don't notice on the other side. Or what I normally do though is I just normally bring my needle back down around where the knots are, or where the base is, and you can find something there to weave it through. And as long as you can kind of feel a bit of resistance, like I kind of do one weave through and then I do my loop. So then I'll go back through again and make a loop. And I just know that those French knots are pretty sturdy. Oh, lost my needle. I can just use my hand. Those French knots are pretty sturdy there, and I'd rather actually knot off against that. But while I've been doing that, I've kind of had my finger on the shapes at this side while I knot it off, just to make sure it doesn't pull them really tight. And it kind of does often pull slightly tighter when you knot it off. Don't worry. You can just use your fingers to open them up again, or sometimes they do end up like this one here. They have actually ended up a bit straighter than I hoped, but they are quite long, so it's hard to keep that hugely round shape. Yeah, sometimes they do just end up a bit straighter than you want, but that's okay. We get more practice. You can always open them up again. Yeah. All right. So let me show you that all over again. I'm actually just going to snip that tail because it's not on my needle and I can't weave it under anything. So I'm just going to snip that and that's all good. All right. I'll show you that all again. Yeah, it's such a fun technique. Like they just look so beautiful, the lazy daisies, when you make flowers with them. So yeah, it's a really good stitch to have under your belt. Okay, so if you're wanting to watch that from the start again, let me show you another set. So I haven't actually done the French knots on this one, but let's just pretend I have. I mean, you can actually do your French knots after. It doesn't really matter. Bring your needle up from the back at the pointy end of one of the leaves on the side and pull your slack through so that the knot is just securing on the back, just like we always do. Right, so then we're going to go back down where we came from, but this time we're going to make a loop. So I just lay the tail out in the direction that I want my leaf to be, and then I just hold that with my thumb. And now I'm going to go back down where I came from, just beside. Try not to get the try not to stab the knot, because that is really frustrating. Cool. And then pull some slack through, but leave a loop that's quite a lot bigger than what you want. And then bring your needle up from the back to the front at the end, just short of the end of the curvy end of the leaf. But this time it's inside the loop. So when you pull your thread through, just pull away from where you've come from. And as you pull the slack, you notice that you make that lovely loop shape. And you can kind of use your needle to and your thumb to get it to the shape you want. And once it's about right, I just hold it with my thumb and then I pull that slack a bit tighter. And then you can just do a single little stitch over the end of the loop. Hold it firmly with your finger while you pull your slack through again so it keeps its shape. And that is one leaf. And then you just want to come back up wherever you want your next one to start and do the same again. So lay the tail across the direction you want your leaf to go and hold that with your thumb, and then go back down where you came from, creating that loop, and then come back up from the back to the front this time, right near the end of the leaf or the petal, and then pull your slack away from you. Just seems to work better that way. And use that free hand just to shape the petal as you want it. Once you've got it right, give it a little tug to make sure you've pulled all the slack through. And then do a little tiny stitch to hold it in place. So your thumb does quite a lot of work here to keep that petal in place, that petal or leaf in place. Okay, now we'll just do that third one, and then I'll answer some questions. Oh, and I'll just show you how I knotted it off again. So this time I'm going to show you how I knot it off just against the little piece of fabric, because sometimes you might do a flower where there isn't really anything nearby. So what I do if that happens is, so I've got my finger on the leaves and I'm holding them in place the whole time I do this. So I'm going to just, I'm going to hold them in place with my finger when I pull the slack. So I'm just going to do a tiny little duck under that little, I'll just scoop some fabric there, just that tiny little piece of fabric. And then when I pull that through, I'm going to do the usual duck my needle back through the knot, but I'm really making sure when I pull that tight, I'm holding onto the leaf on the underside with my finger so I don't pull it out of shape. And then, yeah, and then that's my little knot to secure it there. Then I probably would just take that tail and I'd just take it back to there and then knot it off. I cut it off. Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to do the bauble hangers. So it's exactly the same, but you're just doing a single lazy daisy. So with the bauble hangers, the only difference is that it's a single one on its own, and I think they look great with 6 strands of floss. And there's just a little trick where I kind of do it over top of the garland string as well to secure it, which I thought looked quite fun. So let me show you in terms of the colors. If you're doing the summer pattern, it's super easy. It's just that lovely gold color, gold. It's kind of a cooler gold color. It's 834. And if you're doing the winter, they are actually different colors. So the geometric baubles have that lovely 945 color, and the bubbly baubles have that light tan color, the 437. So I'll start with the 437. I honestly don't think it really matters which colors of these you use to finish yours off, because it's quite hard to even tell when you look at it. So I'm just going to cut a piece of thread. And what I might do with these ones is I won't unwind my floss, and we'll see if they hold their shape a bit better in terms of the threads coming apart. So it's exactly the same technique as I taught you. Oh. All right, so in this case, you just want to start at the pointy end of the loop, which is right beside the bauble, and bring your needle up. So maybe just watch me if you're busy doing the holly. Just have a watch of this. So you pull your thread right through just like we did, and then lay your tail out over your fabric towards the garland string. And I'm just going to hold that there with my thumb and go back down right beside where I came up, and just use my thumb there to make that loop happen. And when it's quite big, I'm just going to leave it there. And then I'm going to bring my needle up just underneath the garland string and pull it up. What's happened there? See, that got caught then, and I wonder if it's not unwound. And then pull the slack away from you or towards you, whichever way you're holding your hoop. And then you know how we do that little stitch just to secure it? I actually just did that little stitch right over top of the garland string. So it was kind of like they were hanging off the garland string. And that is your hanger. So I'll show you that again. And I'll show you, I'll just knot that off because because they're quite separate, you kind of have 2 options. Like you can just knot it off and cut it and start again. Or you could, if you were working on the summer one, they're all the same color, you could just on the underside weave your needle along the garland to get to the point of the next one and then stitch it. And that just means you won't be left with a thread shadow going like directly across there that you might see through the fabric. But I think for now, like the easiest way is just to knot it off and then do your next one. So I'll show you another one. So it's really easy just to knot that off against the garland string, and then I'm just going to tidy my tail along the garland string a bit. And then I'll do the next one. Cool. So the next one of that color, we'll just do this one here. So you bring your needle up beside the bauble, and lay your tail out up towards the garland string and use your free hand to hold it there while you poke the needle back where you came from, create that nice loop, then bring your needle up just under the garland string inside the loop and pull the slack gently through so you get that nice loopy shape. And then do your little securing stitch right over top of the garland string. Looks so cute. Yeah, and then just knot it off on the underside and keep going. Okay. So yeah, let's say you've finished your stitching and you want to remove your pen. So depending on what pen you've got, like if you've used pencil or an actual pen, then you'll just be leaving it there as it is. And hopefully you've been able to find what your placement's okay if you just did the dots instead of the lazy daisies. You can see now why you wouldn't want to draw that on necessarily, because it's not easily covered up with the stitches. So if you've got one of the water soluble pens, which I know a lot of you have been using, once your pattern's done, you remove that by running it underwater. And yeah, it seems really weird to get your embroidery and actually put it under running water, but that's how I do it. And I just make sure the water is just tepid, kind of lukewarm, and it's not like blasting at it. It's just gentle water. And if I've got it in one of these plastic hoops, I actually just leave it in the hoop when I do it even. Or you can take it out and yeah, just gently run the water over it and you'll just see the blue pen disappear. You don't really want to be rubbing it or anything. And then I just lay it flat and I pat it dry with a clean cloth, and then I just leave it to dry. So the key is just you don't want to rub it because you might disturb your stitches quite a lot. These are kind of okay, but if you had something like a woven rose, you'd have to be really careful. And the other, sometimes when people use water soluble pens, they just dab at them with a wet cotton bud. And yes, the pen will disappear, but I find often I'll go back and look at it and it's come back and it'll be all pulled. There'll be blue puddles around. And I think that's because when you dab it, you're kind of just moving it around the fabric and you might be taking away a little bit, but I prefer to actually run water over it so that it takes the blue pen away. So that is how you do the water soluble ones, but I'm going to show you the ones that remove with heat. So let's have a look. I'm going to put on the hairdryer. So this is going to be loud, but I'm going to show you first. So if you're using one of the Pilot friction pens or one of these other brand pens that come off with heat, this is what happens and it looks so cool. It's like magic. I just have to wait for the hairdryer to heat up, okay? So bear with me. Okay, are you watching? Magic! Now, you will see sometimes it does come back a bit. I did this pen really hard. I was using it for a reel today. So normally it won't matter because there'll be stitches everywhere, but you sometimes have to go over it again. And I'm not going to bother doing that now, but I think when we started this, I said don't press really hard with those pens. I have had the odd occasion where there's this line that seems to kind of come back with a shadow. And I've talked to lots of other embroidery artists, and it's just what happens with those pens. But when that has happened to me, I've actually just got an iron, like a hot house iron, and done a little just heated, just kind of got the iron on the bit that wasn't coming off, and that's worked really well. So yeah, hopefully you'll be fine either way. I love these pens. I think the downside of them, like the friction pen, is that it can leave a very faint line, but I'm not a perfectionist, so it doesn't bother me. And it's just so much easier than a water soluble pen. I love the water soluble pens. I think they're awesome. But if you can use a heat erasable one, then why not? So I'll show you on this. This is the one I finished today. See how you can see the faint lines still? So I'm just going to go over that. There we go. Oh, it looks so nice once the lines are gone. And I'll just show you on this one too. Oh, sorry, Matt. Yeah, so I could do this all day. Yeah, so if you don't, most people probably have a hairdryer, but I do use an iron as well. And you just want to be careful using an iron again. You want to make sure you don't burn your fabric and your stitches. And just press. Don't, because you're just going to muck them up. Just press. And yeah, that works well. Cool. So the last thing for me to teach you tonight is how to hand sew to finish your hoop. So I am going to just whip into that now, and I'm going to go through it quite fast because I know that most of you are going to watch this on replay once you finish. I don't want you to feel rushed to finish your pattern, so I'm just going to show you how to finish it in a hoop. And I know some of you aren't keeping it in a hoop, but this is for those of you who are. So let's just assume for right now that you're going to put it into a different hoop. So that's what I'm doing. You can leave it in the same hoop, and you just need to, you don't have to worry about this part. You can just do the hand sewing part. So I am going to pop this into a smaller hoop. Cool. So pop your piece in whatever hoop you want to frame it in. And just make sure it's straight up and down. This pattern's really forgiving. It won't matter if you don't get it exactly straight. I'm not even sure exactly what is straight, but that looks about right to me. And then you want to get it, oh, why do I keep moving? You want to get it as tight as you can in the hoop before you do this little running stitch to finish it, because it is really hard to tighten it once you're finished, and it just looks way better if it's nice and straight. So go around and tighten it. Pull that a bit tight. So get it as nice and tight as you can, and pull the fabric through so you're really happy, because you'll only get kind of one chance to do this. And then once you've got it what you think's tight, if you have a screwdriver, go on and screwdriver it tighter. So I'm going to totally seal it now, just with a couple more. And that is feeling good. And now we're going to just do a really simple running stitch around the back. So it's going to look like that. So it's up to you. Like, I find I like to cut the fabric a lot shorter so that it doesn't push through. Like if your fabric's really long and it all tightens, then when you put it on the wall, you kind of see it. It's not a major, but you can kind of see it poking through. So I cut it so it's a couple of centimeters wide. I kind of just do it by eye, but I think it is a couple of centimeters. So, oh, that's probably more like 1.5 centimeters. Oh, and that's more like 1 centimeter. Doesn't really matter. This is not going to be seen by anyone because it's going to be on the wall. I am just using some sharp craft scissors, but you can use your embroidery scissors or kitchen scissors or whatever's comfortable. So yeah, there we are. And then we just literally do a running stitch around it. But there's something you could do first, which I've started doing lately. You can actually put a piece of cardboard on the inside before you do the step. So before you secure the fabric at the back, you can put a piece of card in, and that just tidies it up, and then you don't see what's happening on the back. There's so many different techniques around how to finish your hoop. And yeah, I could spend a lot of time on them, but I'll just show you this really simple one. But another one is you can like back it with a piece of felt and do a whip stitch around, which I teach in the Makers Academy. And lots of people use glue. Like one of the makers I love watching, she like puts a piece of I think she puts a piece of cardboard in and then she glues in a piece of felt. So I don't like getting glue too near my stitching because I'm just worried it's going to get through on the fabric and show really badly, but that is an option. Cool. So yeah, so if you don't want to put the piece of cardboard in, but you don't want the pieces pushing up on it, you can actually just cut it really close to the hoop edge. Like that's really near the inner hoop, and that still works fine. Okay, so let me show you how to do it. So I'm going to use a red thread just so you can see what I'm doing. Just measure a bit that's easily bigger than your hoop so that so I just cut a piece that's like easily bigger and then thread your needle. Whoops. I'm using, so with this, I would just use whatever light color thread you have, just so that it's not visible. And you don't need a thick 6-stranded piece of floss, but because I want you to see what I'm doing this differently. Okay, so what you want to do is just push your needle down into the fabric. I'm going to just constantly stitch just under 1 centimeter away from the edge of the hoop. Just pull your needle through down from the outside of the fabric, not the inside, the outside, and pull through most of the slack, but leave a decent sized tail, okay? And now we're just going to do a running stitch right around. So a running stitch is like back stitch, remember, but you don't do the back part. You just go one stitch and then another. So I'm doing this pretty roughly because no one's going to see it, but you could take your time and make it beautiful and do lovely tight stitches. But I do my stitches like 1 centimeter long, each one, and I'm actually going to sew it. So that's just when you scoop the fabric, I can actually do like 2 stitches at once on each side at once and just pull that through. Got a bit twisted there. So when you're doing this, just be careful you don't pull so tight that you pull that slack through. You want that tail there. And just keep going around and try to keep your stitches a similar length away from the edge of the hoop. I really don't think you need to worry too much. Like I normally when I'm doing this technique, it's because I've like finished a pattern and I'm frantically trying to get it ready to photograph. And I go pretty fast and they always look the same from the front when they're on the wall. Someone's just asked, do I have a technique video about how to make a cardboard that fits within the hoop? Well, the best way to do it would be to be organized. And before you put your fabric in the hoop, just lay the inner hoop flat on a piece of card and trace around the inside. And that will give you the exact right size. If you've left it like me, like if you're anything like me, you'll leave it till your fabric's already in the hoop. And then then I would probably just trace around the outside and then figure out it's about 1 centimeter smaller and cut it smaller, which is actually what I did on this one, because that is not perfect. Like it could actually come out, but it's holding its own in there. Yeah. But yeah, try and trace the inside of the inner hoop before you put your fabric in it. Gosh, this is really stretching my brain, these questions. Oh no. What is the length in millimeters between the hoop and the stitches vertically? Is about, I'm doing it just less than 1 centimeter. So I'm doing it about 8 millimeters. And I don't know if I've been quite consistent the whole way around, but it's about that. The fabric's cut a bit unevenly, but I'm trying to keep my stitches at around about that point. I always have dreams of it being like a Friday night and I could come along and like have a wine while I teach you guys. And then I think, no. That would not be good. I'd be getting so confused with talking about threads and fabrics and yarn and yep. Okay, so with your last stitch, you want it to finish up on the same side as your original one. I'm just going to take the needle off. I'm done. So see, I've got two tails and they're both hanging out on the outside of the fabric. Okay, and this is the fun part. So you just grab both in your hand and pull them in, tighten them, and look, it like gathers your fabric up. I'll just do a granny knot there and pull them tight. And now, I haven't knotted off, but now the fabric's all gathered at the back and you can't see it. So then you just want to secure that knot off. So what you need to do is do your one little granny knot and then push it against the side of the hoop so that it's still got the tension on. And then you just need to carefully, it's just like tying your shoelaces kind of knot. Do your other one, but try and keep the tension on the first half. I often sometimes get Matt to come and put his finger there while I do the second one, but I can kind of do that carefully. And then, yep, you've got your knot. Snip off the tail and it's done. Seems like a shame that the one I'm showing you is actually not finished, but that is just a really simple way to finish your hoop. And if you wanted to do the really beautiful option where you put a felt backing on, and I've seen these where people they stitch something on before they put the felt. Then you actually do this step. You still would do this step first anyway, and then you whip stitch on the felt. So yeah, that's kind of a really nice fail-safe way to do it.
I really hope you enjoyed making our Christmas charms pattern and just feel such a sense of accomplishment. If you'd like to hear more about future patterns and tutorials, then you can just click the subscribe button below as well. And I'd really love to see your progress with embroidery and your Christmas charms pattern, so please do share it with me. Just tag me on Instagram with Clever Poppy.